I approached the building cautiously, each step crunching against gravel. The warehouse was clearly abandoned, yet it felt anything but empty. Just as I was about to turn back, a faint sound reached me, a door creaking open somewhere behind me. I spun around, my pulse hammering in my ears. But there was nothing, only silence. Panic overtook me. I rushed back to my car, fumbling with the door handle, and sped away from that place without looking back. My mind raced with questions. Who had guided me there? And why? The experience left me shaken, but also determined to uncover the truth. I sought help from a cybersecurity expert specializing in automotive technology. After a meticulous investigation, he confirmed my worst fears. My car had been compromised by a sophisticated hacking device, one that allowed an external party to manipulate its systems remotely. The hacker's motives remained a mystery, but the expert assured me the device had been removed and my vehicle was now secure. With the immediate threat eliminated, a fragile sense of relief settled over me, yet I couldn't fully shake the unease. The knowledge that someone had targeted me for reasons unknown lingered like a shadow. I continued to drive, cautious and hyper-aware of every sound and flicker on the dashboard, always watching for signs of something amiss. In the end, the mystery of the phantom car remained unsolved, but the ordeal had changed me. It taught me that the greatest dangers often come from where we least expect them, and that vigilance isn't just a precaution, it's survival. Story 15. The postcard arrived on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, slipping into my routine with such subtlety that I almost missed it. I was half listening to the radio while sorting through the day's mail when it caught my eye. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. A glossy piece of cardstock with an image on the front. But as I studied it, my blood ran cold. It was a photograph of my house, taken from a distance. The picture captured the front facade, the neat lawn, and the quiet familiarity of home. But there was something chilling about it. This wasn't a realtor's flyer or an old snapshot. It was current, recent. Someone had stood outside, close enough to take it. I flipped it over, and my heart began to pound. Scrawled across the back, in uneven, almost trembling handwriting, were 3 words. I know your secret. There was no return address, only a generic postmark from some place I didn't recognize. Even the address written on the postcard itself was meaningless, a jumble of numbers and letters that led nowhere. I turned it over and over in my hands, searching for some clue, but found none. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a prank, a misguided attempt at intimidation, a sick joke. I tossed it aside, trying to forget it. But as the hours passed, the unease settled over me like a weight, growing heavier with each tick of the clock. That evening, I decided to take action. The message might have been vague, but the implication was clear. Someone had been watching me, or at least my home, and they knew something they shouldn't. I walked from room to room, checking every lock, every window, every door, scanning for signs of tampering. Everything was exactly as it should be. Nothing appeared disturbed. Yet, even after a third inspection, the sense of vulnerability lingered. The postcard was more than a threat. It was a reminder of how exposed I truly was. Someone out there not only knew where I lived, but had stood close enough to capture a photo of my house. The realization that someone had been able to send such a menacing message filled me with dread. I thought about contacting the police again, but without more concrete evidence or a clear threat, I doubted they could do much. I had already reported the strange texts I'd received before, and with nothing to show for it, my confidence in their ability to help had dwindled. In the days that followed, my life became a haze of paranoia. I avoided leaving the house alone, often asking friends to accompany me on errands or short trips, anything to avoid being by myself. Every sound outside, every rustle, every creak of wood made me freeze. My mind raced with dark possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. I began paying closer attention to my surroundings, scanning every face, every car parked too long at the curb. Even my neighbors, once familiar and friendly, now seemed like potential suspects. The feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin, and I couldn't shake the thought that the postcard was just the beginning, a warning of something far worse to come. One sleepless night, I sat by the window, staring out into the darkness. The house was silent, the only sounds the occasional whoosh of a passing car on the street. My thoughts kept circling back to the postcard, to its unsettling message, and the horrifying knowledge that someone out there knew my secret and had been close enough to photograph my home. Weeks passed, and the fear became a constant presence in my life. I obsessed over every detail, desperate to find some explanation. I pored over old photographs, scoured every document related to my house, and even contacted previous owners to ask if they had experienced anything similar. But there were no leads, no answers, only silence. The postcard sat on my desk like a sentinel, its message etched into my mind, a haunting mantra that kept me perpetually on edge. I tried to live as normally as I could, but the fear was always there, lurking at the edges of my thoughts. And then, one evening, as I was preparing dinner, there came a knock at the door. My heart pounded as I approached the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw a stranger standing on the other side, holding a large envelope. I hesitated, my mind racing with questions about what could be inside. Finally, with trembling fingers, I cracked the door open just enough. Without a word, the stranger handed me the envelope and walked away quickly, disappearing down the street. I shut the door behind me, locking it twice, and turned the envelope over in my hands. Like the first postcard, it was unmarked. No return address, no indication of who had sent it. My pulse quickened as I tore it open, desperate for a clue, an explanation, anything. Inside was another postcard. This one was even worse than the first. Instead of a distant photo of my house, it showed a close-up of my front door, the very spot where I now stood holding it. On the back, in the same uneven, menacing handwriting, were the words, "I'm always watching. You can't hide from me." A chill ran through me, and my knees nearly buckled. It was no longer just a vague threat. This person was actively monitoring me, turning my home into a stage for their sinister game. I was no longer just living life. I was an unwilling participant in something far darker. I took the new postcard straight to the police. They listened, took it seriously, and advised me to remain vigilant. Patrols were increased in my neighborhood, but their reassurances felt hollow. The feeling of being watched didn't fade. If anything, it grew heavier. The postcards weren't just messages. They were taunts, reminders of my helplessness. Then, just as suddenly as they'd started, the postcards stopped. The silence was almost as unnerving as the messages themselves. I remained on edge, my nerves stretched thin, and began living in a state of constant awareness. I fortified my home, triple-checking locks and monitoring every sound. But the damage had already been done. The knowledge that someone had known so much about me, had stood outside my door, photographing my home, left a scar I couldn't shake. The postcards hadn't just terrified me, they had reshaped me. I had become more cautious, more suspicious, less trusting. Those haunting messages were more than just threats. They were a lasting reminder of how fear and the unknown can invade your life, leaving an indelible mark on your sense of safety. Story 16. The excitement of moving into my new apartment faded far faster than I'd imagined. What was meant to be a fresh start, a sanctuary where I could leave behind the chaos of my old life, quickly became a place of unease. The building itself was old, but beautifully maintained. Its high ceilings and charming details had captivated me at first sight, but beneath its quiet exterior, something dark was waiting. It began with the first note. One evening, I came home to find a small folded piece of paper slid my door. The handwriting was neat, written in black ink, but the message was anything but friendly. I know what you did. I'm watching you. There was no signature, no clue as to who had sent it. I told myself it had to be some kind of prank or a misunderstanding, but the ominous tone lingered in my mind like a splinter. Then more notes appeared, each one different, but all carrying the same sinister theme of accusation and surveillance. You think you can hide, but I see everything. Another read. You're not safe here. I know all about your past. The details were specific, far too specific. They mentioned my job, my daily routines, even the names of my family members. Whoever was writing these knew me intimately, but I had no idea who they were. My sense of paranoia began to spiral. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of someone following me even when I stepped outside. Every sound in the apartment became amplified. The creak of a floorboard, the hum of the old pipes, the whisper of the wind against the window. I started double and triple checking my locks each night. The once simple act of turning the deadbolt, now a ritual of desperation. I avoided leaving the apartment alone, afraid of what might happen if I did. Desperate for answers, I turned to my landlord. Mr. Collins was a gruff, but seemingly well-meaning man in his late 60s. When I explained what had happened, the notes, the threats, the feeling of being constantly observed, he frowned deeply, his brows knitting together, as if this wasn't the first time he'd heard something like it. He seemed genuinely concerned at first, promising to look into the matter personally. Yet after several days of investigation, he returned empty-handed. We've checked the security footage and spoken with the staff, he told me, his tone apologetic but firm. No one has seen anything unusual. The surveillance shows nothing. No strangers, no one coming or going who shouldn't be there. Frustration burned inside me. It felt like I was battling an invisible enemy, someone who seemed to know every intimate detail of my life, but left no trace of their presence. With no leads and no way to identify the source of the notes, I realized I'd have to take matters into my own hands. That weekend, I transformed my apartment into a fortress. I installed a comprehensive security system, sparing no expense. High-resolution cameras covered the exterior. Motion detectors lined the hallways, and a sophisticated alarm system was wired to alert me to any movement inside. The installation process was invasive and costly, but the promise of peace of mind was worth it. For a brief moment, I felt relief. The cameras gave me a fragile sense of safety, knowing that every corner was under surveillance. offered a small measure of control over the chaos. I hoped the visibility of the cameras would scare off whoever was tormenting me, that the harassment would finally end. But the notes didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied, each one sharper and more personal than the last. Now they contained details only someone very close to me could possibly know. My favorite foods, my exact work schedule, even the names of friends I'd only mentioned in passing. You think a few cameras will keep me away? One note mocked, "I'm always closer than you think." That line echoed in my mind like a curse. The constant fear of an unseen threat began to erode what little sense of normalcy I had left. Every night, I would sit at my desk, hunched over my laptop, reviewing hours of recorded footage in obsessive loops, searching desperately for any flicker of movement, any unfamiliar silhouette near my door. Yet each time, the screen stared back at me with the same cold emptiness. No faces, no clues, just me, trapped in my own paranoia, watched by someone I could not see. But there were never any clear answers. Everything came to a head the day I received a note unlike any of the others. This one referenced a deeply personal event from my past, something so painful and private I had spoken of it only rarely. "You haven't forgotten, have you?" It read. "Your past is catching up with you." My blood ran cold. How could anyone possibly know that? It was as though my entire life had been laid bare under an invisible microscope. Feeling trapped and exhausted, I reached out to the police once more. They launched a thorough investigation, combing through every lead and every scrap of evidence I had collected. But despite their efforts, there was nothing. No fingerprints, no surveillance footage, no trace of the stalker. "We'll keep an eye out for anything unusual," Officer Martinez told me. But his words felt hollow. Without more information, they couldn't pin down who was behind it all. Helplessness began to settle over me like a heavy fog. My security system, once a source of comfort, had become little more than a ritual, an attempt to impose order on the chaos. I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, always on edge, glancing over my shoulder at the slightest sound. What had once been a charming apartment had transformed into a suffocating prison. Each day a battle to maintain some shred of normalcy. Yet amid the dread, I found a strange sense of discipline in my precautions. I documented every note, every incident, meticulously compiling evidence in the hope that one day it would all lead to a breakthrough. The police stayed involved, but case cold, stagnant like still water. It wasn't until I finally decided to leave, packing my belongings, shutting down the cameras, and walking out of that apartment for the last time, that the harassment stopped. As I closed the door behind me, a wave of relief washed over me, mingled with a lingering unease. The apartment that had once been my sanctuary had become a place of constant dread. Leaving it felt both like a victory and a surrender. My new home was far from perfect, but it offered what I needed most, a fresh start. I had learned to be cautious, to remain aware, and I vowed never to let my guard down again. The notes were gone, the fear no longer constant, but the experience had left its mark. Even now, as I settle into my new space, I remain vigilant, acutely aware that some shadows of the past don't simply vanish. Sometimes they follow you, even when you think you've escaped them. Story 17. I was alone in my apartment, savoring the quiet after a long week of work. The place was modest, but comfortable. My little sanctuary, where evenings were usually spent with a good book or a favorite show. But lately, Something had begun to erode that sense of peace. It started subtly. At night, when the world outside was still, I would feel it, an inexplicable sensation of being watched. At first, I told myself it was stress or an overactive imagination, yet the feeling persisted, like a weight pressing against my back, invisible but undeniable. Then, one evening, it became impossible to ignore. I was curled up on the couch, absorbed in a book, when I glanced toward the window. Just beyond the glass stood a figure, a dark silhouette, indistinct and featureless, blending into the night. My heart lurched. I squinted, straining to see details, but it remained only a shadow, unmoving and silent. I rose slowly, each step toward the window, thick with dread. Even though it didn't move, I could feel it, the weight of its gaze fixed on me, cold and heavy. It wasn't merely watching, it was studying. I considered calling the police, my fingers trembling near my phone. But when I looked back, the figure was gone. I rushed to the window, scanning the street below. Nothing. No footsteps retreating. No shadow slipping into the darkness. Only empty pavement under the faint glow of the streetlights. Perhaps it was someone passing by. Perhaps it was just a trick of the light. I tried to believe that, but my pulse wouldn't slow. The following night, it returned. I was in the same spot, book in hand, when the silhouette reappeared. Again in that same place, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. This time the chill ran deeper, curling cold fingers around my spine. The figure stood cloaked in darkness, silent, still. I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. Heart hammering, I approached the window cautiously, inching closer with each step. I pulled back the curtain just enough to get a better look, my breath catching in my throat. But as soon as I approached the window, the figure vanished into the night, leaving me staring at an empty street. Determined to uncover the truth, I began taking more precautions. I installed heavy curtains and blinds on every window, hoping they would grant me privacy and keep the intruder at bay. I started locking each window carefully and checking the locks over and over before going to bed. Yet, even with these measures, the feeling of being watched never left. I kept a small flashlight on my nightstand, ready to sweep the darkness if I woke in the middle of the night. My phone remained within arm's reach, always ready to call for help. Still, the figure never reappeared while I was actively looking for it, as though it knew exactly when to vanish. The anxiety began to eat away at me. Every creak of the floorboards or whisper of wind made me jump. My sleep became restless, haunted by dreams of faceless silhouettes lurking in the shadows. I started avoiding the living room at night, retreating to the locked safety of my bedroom instead. One evening, after a particularly long day, I resolved to relax. I cooked myself a comforting dinner, settled into a cozy spot on the couch, and tried to drown out the unease that had become a constant companion. For a moment, it almost worked, until my eyes drifted toward the window. There it was again, the silhouette, watching from the darkness. This time, frustration surged through my fear. I grabbed my flashlight, stormed to the window, and yanked the curtains aside, flooding the night outside with a harsh beam of light. But once again, the figure was gone. No movement, no trace, only the stillness of the empty street. My hands trembled with a mixture of anger and dread as I stood there, staring into the dark. Enough was enough. The next morning, I called a local security company and arranged to have cameras installed all around my apartment. I also scheduled a consultation with a security expert to evaluate every point of entry, determined to make my home as secure as possible. They were professional, thorough, and reassuring, outlining steps to improve my safety. That night, I sat in the living room. The new cameras blinked softly in the dim light, tiny watchful eyes keeping vigil over my home. I tried to ignore the nervous anticipation building in my chest, clinging to the hope that the presence of the cameras would finally drive away whatever had been watching me. But no matter how many pricks I took, the sense of dread never truly left. That night, I sat hunched over my laptop, the glow of the screen casting long shadows across the room as I monitored the live feed from the cameras. Every angle of my apartment's perimeter was perfectly clear, the footage crisp and precise, yet empty. I checked the feed obsessively, scanning for any flicker of movement or disturbance. Nothing. The streets outside remained deserted, the stillness almost oppressive. Despite the added security, I couldn't relax. The low hum of the camera system filled the silence, offering only a hollow sense of comfort. I left the lights on, hoping they would banish whatever lingered in the dark corners of my mind. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into sleep, but my dreams were crowded with shadowy shapes and silent watchers lurking just out of reach. When morning came, I went straight to my laptop. My fingers trembled slightly as I reviewed the footage from the night before. The cameras had captured everything, every empty sidewalk, every flickering streetlight, but there was no trace of the silhouette. It was as if the figure had never existed at all. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by frustration. The cameras were working. The security company confirmed as much. The system was flawless, they said. No unusual activity. No threat. Perhaps, they suggested gently, it was just anxiety. I tried to take their reassurance to heart, but the unease refused to fade, even without the figure appearing again. I found myself compulsively checking the feeds, glancing out the windows at odd hours. It wasn't just a habit anymore. It had become part of my life. A sense of being watched by something I could neither see nor prove existed. Days turned into weeks, and the nights grew quieter. Still, the vigilance stayed. I had adapted to this new normal, living with a constant edge of awareness. My eyes always flicking to shadows, my ears straining for sounds in the silence. The figure never returned, and I prayed it never would. But the experience had left a mark. I had been changed, more cautious, more aware, and forever alert to the possibility of eyes lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. Story 18. It was on a crisp autumn morning that I first noticed the box sitting quietly on my doorstep. The day had begun like any other, coffee in hand, preparing for work, when my eyes fell on it. A small, unremarkable cardboard box with no return address, no markings. At first, I almost ignored it, but then I saw the label, my own name scrawled across it, and something in me hesitated. I knelt down and opened it carefully. It was an object that sent a chill down my spine. A pair of my old sneakers, scuffed, worn, the laces frayed in the exact way I remembered. I had thrown them out weeks ago, and yet here they were. Nestled beside them was written in uneven, unfamiliar handwriting. I'm following step. My heart began to pound. How had someone gotten hold of my discarded shoes? Who would send something like this? I tried to calm myself, to frame it as some tasteless prank by a friend. But no one I knew would go this far. No one. Determined to understand what had happened, I turned to my home security cameras. They covered every inch of my porch. Surely, I thought, they would show me who had left the package. But when I pulled up the footage from the night before, my unease deepened. There was nothing. No car pulling up. No person approaching. The timestamp showed the box simply appearing, as though it had materialized out of thin air. My stomach dropped. Someone had gotten close enough to my home to leave a package, and yet left no trace, no evidence of their presence at all. The realization hit me hard. Whoever had sent this wasn't just playing a prank. They had been watching me, tracking me, knowing where I went, what I threw away, what I left behind. Suddenly, my daily routines felt exposed, vulnerable, compromised. As the days passed, the message in that note echoed in my mind. Each word a shadow I couldn't escape. I began scrutinizing every detail of my life, wondering where they might be watching from next. I began to realize just how predictable my life had become. The same routes to work, the same paths on my evening walks. What once felt like comforting routine now seemed dangerous, like a map someone could use to follow me. In an effort to shake that vulnerability, I started changing my patterns. Different routes to work, new coffee shops, unfamiliar parks. Yet every time I saw someone on the street who seemed out of place, my pulse spiked. I avoided eye contact with strangers who lingered too long and became hyper-aware of my surroundings, scanning every corner as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. Despite all these precautions, the anxiety never fully left. Each time I returned home, I would circle the perimeter of my property, peering into the darkness for any sign of movement. The box and the note still echoed in my mind, a gnawing reminder that my safety had been compromised. One evening, after shopping at a new grocery store I started frequenting, saw a figure across the street. They stood perfectly still beneath a dim streetlight, dressed in a dark coat and hat, their face lost in shadow. My heart began to pound. Instinctively, I took a longer route home, circling the block to avoid crossing paths. Even after I made it back to my apartment, the image of the figure lingered, unsettling and sharp. Determined to regain control, I installed more security cameras, covering every blind spot the previous system might have missed. I also began keeping a detailed log of my daily activities, every place I went, every face I saw, hoping to catch some pattern or clue. Weeks passed with no new developments, but the fear never eased. I stuck to my altered routines, always doubling back, always watching over my shoulder. I avoided staying out late and made sure no one was following me before I reached home. Yet the vigilance was exhausting. The tension coiled inside me like a spring, making it harder to think, harder to breathe, harder to live. One night, while reviewing my security footage, something unusual caught my eye. For a few seconds, the video glitched. Frames flickered and distorted, warping into static shapes. In that flicker, just barely visible, was a shadowy figure moving near my front door. It lasted only an instant, but it was enough to reignite every buried fear. I immediately saved the footage and took it to the police, hoping they might see what I had seen. They were concerned, but ultimately found the evidence inconclusive. Without a clear image or proof, there was little they could do beyond advising me to keep monitoring and promising to increase patrols in my area. Their reassurances felt hollow. As the months passed, the sharp edge of my fear dulled, but it never truly disappeared. I continued to live cautiously, changing my routines, double-checking the locks and glancing over my shoulder whenever I stepped outside. The shoes, the cryptic note, the figure at my door, all of it became a haunting memory, proof that someone had been close enough to pierce the fragile boundary of my privacy. Even now, despite the silence, I can't shake the feeling that the person behind the note is still out there, hidden in plain sight, watching from the shadows. The fear of being followed has become part of me, a constant low hum at the edge of my life. Every so often, when I catch something unusual, a fleeting movement, a stranger who lingers a second too long, the anxiety spikes again, sharp and cold. The shoes and the notes remain etched in my mind, a chilling reminder that even in the most familiar places, danger can lurk closer than we ever imagined. Story 19. It began as an ordinary evening. I was cleaning the bathroom, an oddly soothing ritual after a long day. Steam from a hot shower clung to the mirror, blurring its surface. As I wiped away the condensation with a cloth, something caught my attention. My reflection wasn't quite matching my movements. At first, I brushed it off as a trick of the light, or perhaps the steam creating an optical illusion. But the unease grew. My reflection lagged just a fraction of a second behind me, as if the mirror itself were struggling to keep up. I stopped and stared. That's when it froze. My reflection held a smile, while my real face shifted into a frown. A chill crept up my spine. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought that something was wrong. Maybe fatigue, maybe stress. I wiped the glass again, harder this time, hoping to clear whatever strange effect lingered. But the distortions deepened. My reflection twisted and warped, displaying expressions I wasn't making. Frowns, sneers, even looks of terror, while my real face remained neutral. It was like the mirror was showing me someone else entirely. My heart pounded as I watched my reflection contort into grotesque shapes, its eyes wide with silent screams. Each time I looked away and back, it changed again, mimicking someone or something I didn't recognize. Desperate, I scrubbed the mirror with a different cloth, pressing harder, but the warped images remained. The expressions grew more sinister, more unearthly. My reflection's eyes seemed to widen, pleading or warning, while my own eyes stayed steady in the glass. I told myself it was just a trick of the mind, an optical illusion, a psychological glitch. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The mirror wasn't just reflecting me anymore. It was showing me something else, something watching. Every time I looked away and then back, the reflection seemed more insistent, more alive. It was as if it were trying to communicate with me, pushing against the barrier of the glass. The situation reached its peak one night, as I was brushing my teeth before bed. Everything seemed normal at first. The mirror showed my usual, tired self. But then I noticed it, an almost imperceptible shift. My reflection's eyes were locked onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach twist. I spat out the toothpaste and leaned closer, heart pounding, trying to understand what I was seeing. That's when the reflection did something that made my blood run cold. It began mimicking me with a lag, then started to move on its own, doing things I wasn't doing at all. Its head turned slowly, as though studying me. Its hand lifted and traced a deliberate path across the glass, leaving a smudge that didn't align with mine. The movements were slow, deliberate, mocking. I stumbled back, dropping my toothbrush. The reflection mirrored my startled reaction, but with an eerie delay. Then its eyes widened, staring past me, like it was looking at something behind me. I froze. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I spun around to find the bathroom empty, silent except for my own ragged breathing. Night after night, the distortions became more intense. My reflection took on a life of its own, showing me scenes I wasn't a part of, mirroring actions I wasn't performing. Once, I could have sworn it was speaking, its lips moving soundlessly, as if conversing with someone I couldn't see. I began to dread the mirror, avoiding it whenever possible. When I had to use the bathroom, I averted my gaze, focusing on anything but the glass. In desperation, I hung a curtain over the mirror, hoping to block out whatever malevolent force was creeping through. But even with the curtain drawn, the unease never left me. It was as if something on the other side was still watching, still waiting. I could feel it, the presence of something watching me. The mirror's strange distortions had turned my home into a cage, trapping me with an unseen force that seemed determined to communicate with me or torment me. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian who specialized in the supernatural. After listening carefully to my story, he explained that old mirrors are sometimes believed to hold on to residual energies or even entities. He suggested the mirror might be a conduit for something that didn't belong in my home. His advice was simple, but unsettling. Have the mirror blessed, then dispose of it, to free the space of any lingering presence. With no other options left, I followed his recommendation. A local priest came to bless the mirror, murmuring prayers over the warped glass. Afterward, I wrapped it tightly in cloth and carried it away to be disposed of, my hands trembling the entire time. I replaced it with a new mirror, hoping the nightmare was finally over, and for the first time in weeks, my reflection looked normal. No delays, no distortions, no eyes staring back at me with emotions that weren't mine. But the experience left a mark on me. I could never look into a mirror the same way again without feeling a flicker of apprehension. The echoes of those nights still haunted me, a sense of something just beyond the glass, waiting. The old mirror had felt like a gateway, a thin veil between my world and another, and though it was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that some shadows never truly leave. Story 20. The morning began like any other. I woke up groggy after a night of restless sleep and stumbled out of bed, still wrapped in my blanket. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I froze. Sitting comfortably on my couch was a stranger, deeply engrossed in a book. The sight was so surreal, it took several seconds for my mind to process what I was seeing. The man appeared to be in his mid-30s, dressed in a light blue shirt and jeans. His posture was casual, almost too casual, as he turned each page with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a warm glow, but it did nothing to ease the cold fear that gripped my chest. For a moment I couldn't move. My mind raced. My doors had been locked. How had he gotten in? Who was he? And what did he want? Summoning every ounce of courage, I finally managed to speak. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What are you doing in my house?" The man looked up from his book, his expression softening into a calm, almost friendly smile. "I was waiting for you," he said. His voice was unhurried, disturbingly composed, as though this were the most normal thing in the world. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. His words, delivered with such casual certainty, only heightened my terror. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, keeping my eyes locked on the intruder. He didn't move. He didn't run. He didn't even acknowledge what I was doing. Just sat there, waiting, as if anticipating some invisible cue. The police arrived within minutes, their footsteps echoing through the hallway. Relief surged through me as I led them to the living room. But my relief turned to dread when I saw the couch was empty. The man was gone. All that remained was the book he had been reading, resting neatly on the cushions. My stomach dropped as I stared at its cover. It was an old classic novel, one I had never owned or even seen before. The book now sat on my couch, an eerie and silent reminder of the stranger's presence. The officers combed through my home, checking every room, every window, every door. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been there. Nothing except the book. All the locks were intact, every window secure. It was as if the man had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only that unsettling object. As they took my statement, a cold dread settled in my chest. The thought of someone sitting quietly in my living room while I slept, reading, waiting, was more disturbing than I could put into words. The police promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood, but their reassurances felt hollow. For the rest of the day, I drifted through my house in a daze, my mind replaying the events over and over. Every sound seemed louder, sharper. The creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind outside. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a cage. Night fell, and I found myself unable to relax. I checked every lock again and again, making sure nothing had been overlooked. The book still sat on the couch, a silent intruder, its presence taunting me. I wanted to throw it out, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Part of me feared that handling it would somehow invite something darker into my life. Armed with a baseball bat, I sat in the living room, the book just a few feet away. The silence pressed down on me, broken only by the occasional creak of the settling house. Hours passed. Exhaustion gnawed at me, but fear kept me awake. Eventually, sleep claimed me in broken intervals. The bat still clutched tightly in my hands. My dreams were full of shadowy figures and whispered voices, nightmares that left me drenched in sweat. The next morning, I called a locksmith to change every lock in the house. I also invested in a full security system with cameras and motion sensors, desperate for even a small measure of peace of mind. Weeks passed. The sense of vulnerability never completely faded, but slowly I began to feel a little safer. Still, the memory of the stranger lingered, as did the image of that book on my couch, a quiet, chilling reminder of how easily my home and my safety had been breached. I tried to push that morning out of my mind, the stranger who had appeared as if from nowhere, the way he sat on my couch, as though he belonged there. The book he left behind remained hidden, sealed away in a box at the back of my closet. I couldn't bring myself to throw it out, convinced it held some dark significance I wasn't ready to face. Life slowly began to return to normal, at least on the surface, but the fear never truly left me. I avoided spending long stretches of time alone in the house, and my vigilance over every door, every lock, every shadow became second nature. No matter how many cameras I installed, or how many times I checked the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still out there, watching, waiting for another opportunity to intrude. The police had no leads, no explanation, and no name to give the man. All they could offer were reassurances that felt increasingly hollow. I clung to the hope that the security measures I had put in place would be enough. Yet the memory of that morning refused to fade. It haunted me, a chilling reminder of how fragile the illusion of safety truly is, and how easily someone can slip through the cracks of your sanctuary, leaving you forever changed. Story 21. The photo album had always been there, a quiet constant on my bookshelf. Bound in worn leather, its once crisp edges had softened over the years. Inside were fragments of my life, family gatherings, vacations, candid snapshots, all the small pieces that built my sense of self. Whenever I flipped through it, I felt comforted by the familiar faces and the memories they carried. But one evening, as I was tidying the living room, I noticed the album was gone. I searched everywhere, under the cushions, behind the furniture, even inside cabinets, yet it was nowhere to be found. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I'd simply misplaced it or left it in another room. Days passed. The absence began to gnaw at me. Had it been accidentally thrown out? Taken? The thought unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Then, as suddenly as it had disappeared, the album returned. It sat on the shelf in its usual place, as if it had never been missing at all. Relief quickly turned to unease. No one had entered my home. No one could have returned it. Still, I picked it up, hoping to find comfort in its pages. Instead, a chill ran down my spine. The photos were wrong. The familiar snapshots of my past were gone, every single one replaced. In their place were faces I didn't recognize, strangers staring out from the pages with expressions that ranged from serene to disturbingly intense. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I turned each page, unblinking, almost alive. The arrangement wasn't random. The photos had been placed with meticulous care, each one positioned to form a sequence, a narrative I couldn't decipher, but felt in my bones. It was as though the album was telling a story, just not mine anymore. But the story the album told was not mine. It was foreign, alien, and deeply unsettling. The faces weren't random. They weren't passive images. They looked back at me, each expression tinged with a disturbing awareness, as though the people in the photographs could see me as clearly as I could see them. There were no captions, no names, no dates, only page after page of unfamiliar, unblinking eyes. I tried to rationalize it. Had someone broken into my home and tampered with the album? The thought was almost more terrifying than the photos themselves. I scoured every inch of my house, searching for signs of intrusion, but everything else was untouched. No forced entry, no disturbed furniture, no explanation. The more I examined the album, the more it began to affect me. Some of the faces were blurred or distorted, their features melting into shapes that didn't belong to any normal human expression. They didn't look like photographs anymore. They looked like glimpses of something spectral, something not meant to be seen. The eyes were the worst part. They didn't just seem to follow me. They did. Each time I turned the page, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched from inside the paper. My stomach tightened every time, half expecting one of the figures to reach through the page, or worse, to step out entirely. Desperate for answers, I showed the album to friends and family. They were as puzzled as I was. No one recognized a single face. Some of them even refused to look at it for long, citing an uneasy feeling that clung to the pictures. They offered explanations, a vivid dream, a cruel prank, but none of them made sense. The violation felt personal, intimate. It was as though someone, or something, had not only entered my home, but rearranged my memories. Replacing the familiar with the unknown to unnerve me. I took the album to a local photo expert. They handled it carefully, scanning the pages under bright white light. Their conclusion only made things worse. The photos were real, genuine prints. No digital manipulation, no obvious signs of tampering. But they couldn't tell me who the people were. They couldn't tell me how the photos had ended up in my album. Days turned into weeks. The album sat where I had hidden it, but its presence loomed large in my mind. It had once been a cherished archive of my life. Now it felt like a door, one I was terrified of opening again. But even after locking the album away, its presence clung to me like a shadow. I told myself it was only paper and ink, nothing more. Yet the thought of disposing of it felt wrong, almost dangerous, as though throwing it away would somehow make things worse. It wasn't just an old photo album anymore. It was a thing that had crossed a boundary, an intruder that had wormed its way into my home and my mind. That was when I began to notice other changes. Subtle at first, small objects out of place, items I was sure I hadn't touched, ending up in different rooms. A mug left on the kitchen counter would turn up on the coffee table. A book on my nightstand would be found on the couch. It felt deliberate, as if someone or something was moving them, mocking me. Each creak of the floorboards or rustle of the curtains sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt complicit, as though its walls were closing in, echoing the unease the album had awakened. The question gnawed at me endlessly. Had the album opened a door to something sinister? Or was it simply feeding my paranoia, warping my perception until I no longer trusted my own senses? I could not tell anymore. Desperate to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, I locked the album in a heavy wooden box, sealed it tight, and carried it up into the attic. The space was dark and dusty, a place I rarely visited. I hoped that burying it there, out of sight, might also bury the feeling it carried with it. But the unease followed me down the attic stairs. The faces from the album lingered in my mind, unfamiliar, yet vivid, their eyes glinting behind my closed lids when I tried to sleep. Even sealed away, the album had become more than an object. It was a symbol of intrusion, a talisman of fear. It reminded me, constantly and without mercy, that even the most familiar, comforting things could be turned into sources of dread. Story 22. It was a quiet evening when my phone rang from an anonymous number. I was in the kitchen, the comforting aroma of garlic and herbs swirling through the air, when the screen lit up with the unfamiliar digits. The phone rang again, persistent. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. For a moment, there was nothing, only a thick, oppressive silence. Then it came, heavy breathing, ragged and uneven, as though someone were struggling for air. The sound was disturbingly close, intimate, in a way that made my stomach twist. I waited, expecting a voice, but instead there were strange noises, muffled thumps, indistinct murmurs, and a low droning hum that raised the hairs on my arms. "Hello?" I repeated, sharper this time. No answer. The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing in my kitchen with a knife in one hand and the phone in the other, my heart hammering in my chest. I tried to shake it off. A wrong number, I told myself. A prank. Nothing more. But the calls didn't stop. They came at all hours. Before dawn, late at night, even while I was at work, each one the same, the suffocating breathing, the strange noises. I blocked the number. It didn't matter. The calls kept coming, now from different numbers, each one more unnerving than the last. The anonymity made it worse, feeding the gnawing sense of dread building inside me. One night, just as I was about to go to bed, the phone rang again. I hesitated, then answered, my voice trembling with anger and fear. The same breathing greeted me, heavy, wet, labored, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic scratching sound, as if nails were dragging across wood, somewhere on the other end of the line. In the background, barely audible, came a whisper, a voice, low and indistinct, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. By then the calls had seeped into every corner of my life. My sleep was broken. My work suffered. I found myself staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring, dreading the sound, yet desperate for it to stop. Whoever was calling me wasn't just trying to scare me. They were relentless, and the more the calls continued, the more I felt like someone, somewhere, was closing in. Feeling isolated and desperate for relief, I finally contacted my phone service provider and reported the issue. They assured me they would investigate and advised me to change my number, a drastic but necessary step. I followed their advice, switching to a new number, hoping this would finally end the disturbing calls. For a few days there was peace. I began to relax, feeling a fragile sense of normalcy returning to my life. But then, the calls started again. This time they came from yet another set of new numbers. The cycle felt endless, and the realization that someone was deliberately targeting me became overwhelming. Accepting that I could no longer handle the situation on my own, I turned to the authorities. I contacted the local police and explained everything. The heavy breathing, the strange noises, the persistence of the calls. The officer who took my report was sympathetic but skeptical, warning me that tracing anonymous calls could be difficult and time-consuming. Despite the police's assurances, the calls continued. They became more sporadic, but no less unsettling. It was as though I were trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the eerie presence that lingered just out of sight. The investigation produced no results, leaving me helpless and frustrated, like a pawn in a cruel game orchestrated by someone I couldn't see. The relentless harassment began to erode my mental health. I avoided answering the phone whenever possible, fearing the sounds and whispers that had come to define my nights. I started isolating myself, skipping social events, and keeping the lights on at all times, hoping that constant visibility might offer some sense of safety. The anxiety became a constant companion, making it nearly impossible to focus on everyday tasks. I grew withdrawn, irritable, and consumed by dread. In a desperate attempt to regain control, I began documenting each call with meticulous precision, noting the time, the date, and every detail of the noises I heard. I hoped that my careful records might provide the authorities with something they could use. But deep down, a chilling thought began to take root. Whoever was on the other end of those calls always seemed one step ahead, as if they already knew what I would do next. I began taking my own security more seriously, installing additional locks and setting up security cameras around my home. I hoped that increased vigilance might offer some sense of safety, even if it didn't stop the calls. Yet, despite all my efforts, the calls persisted, arriving intermittently like a shadow I couldn't shake. What disturbed me most wasn't just the intrusion, but the weight of the unknown. I had no idea why I was being targeted or who was behind the harassment. That sense of violation, the creeping feeling of someone intruding into my private space, left me perpetually on edge. Eventually, the calls began to taper off. They never stopped entirely, but their frequency diminished, becoming ghostly echoes of what they once were. I remained vigilant, always bracing for the next ring of an unknown number, but I also tried to reclaim some semblance of normal life. The experience left a permanent mark on me. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, far more cautious about my privacy. The fear of being watched or followed became a quiet, constant undercurrent in my daily routine. Even as time passed, the memory of those calls lingered, a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we all are in an increasingly connected world, where intrusion can slip through unseen and uninvited, leaving its shadow long after it's gone. Story 23. It was a typical Wednesday evening when I returned home after a long, draining day at work. All I wanted was a quiet night to myself. I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter and headed to the bedroom to change into something more comfortable. That was when I noticed it. A faint glint of metal catching the dim light from the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was nothing more than a misplaced object, or maybe just a trick of the light. But as I moved closer to investigate, my stomach dropped. Behind a loose panel in the bedroom wall was a tiny, inconspicuous camera. It was so small, it could easily go unnoticed, but its placement was deliberate, perfectly angled to capture my every move. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. Someone had been watching me. For how long? Weeks? Months? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. My heart pounded as I pulled the device free, examining it with trembling hands. It was modern, compact, and disturbingly efficient. A predator's eye hidden in my own sanctuary. Panic and anger surged through me. How had this gone unnoticed? And more importantly, who had done this? Without wasting another moment, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained what I had found to the operator. Within minutes, officers arrived at my door. I showed them the camera, and they carefully bagged it as evidence. Their professional demeanor couldn't quite hide the unease in their eyes. They conducted a meticulous search of my home, checking every corner for other hidden devices, any sign that someone had tampered with my space. They questioned me about unusual events or suspicious strangers, and I told them about the strange noises, the feeling of being watched, the sense that something had been wrong all along. I had never suspected anything as sinister as this. The police took the camera for forensic analysis, hoping it might reveal some clue about its origin or the person who had placed it there. They promised to keep me updated on their progress. But as days turned into weeks, the updates grew few and far between. When the results finally came back, they were inconclusive. No fingerprints, no identifying marks. The camera's data led to no concrete leads. It was as if the device had simply appeared. A dead end in an investigation that already felt hopeless. The violation of my privacy shook me to my core. Even when I was alone, I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. The safety and comfort of my home, the one place I'd always felt secure, had been shattered. Every small noise, every shift of the shadows seemed magnified, a constant reminder of the intrusion. Desperate for answers, I took matters into my own hands. I combed through every inch of my home, checking electrical outlets, vents, and every possible hiding place. I even hired a professional to conduct a full sweep of the property, but nothing else turned up. It was a relief, and yet somehow a new frustration. Relief that no more hidden devices were found, but frustration that I still didn't know why I had been targeted, by whom. Days became months, and slowly, I tried to rebuild my sense of normalcy. I installed new security measures, cameras outside, motion detectors, stronger locks, anything that might help me reclaim some control over my environment. But the psychological impact lingered. I became hypervigilant, constantly rechecking locks and alarms. Certain parts of my home, especially the bedroom where the camera had been found, became almost impossible for me to relax in. Every unexpected sound sent my heart racing. Finally, I reached out to a counselor, hoping to process the trauma of the invasion. Through therapy, I began to understand the depth of my fear and how profoundly my sense of safety and trust had been violated. It was a slow, difficult process, but it was a start. But over time, I gradually began to feel more in control of my emotions. The mystery of the hidden camera remained unsolved, but I forced myself to focus on the things I could control. I kept in contact with the police, hoping for an update, but none ever came. The investigation seemed to have gone cold, leaving me with nothing but unanswered questions and a lingering sense of uncertainty. Slowly, I learned to live with that unease. I accepted that some answers might never come. Instead, I made deliberate efforts to reclaim my sense of safety, not only physically, but emotionally. I found solace in my daily routines, in spending time with loved ones, and in the quiet act of rebuilding my trust in the security of my own home. The hidden camera became a dark chapter in my life, a stark reminder of how fragile our sense of safety can be. Yet, it also taught me something unexpected: resilience, the importance of seeking help and support when faced with unsettling experiences. The shadow of that unknown observer may never fully disappear, but I've learned to face it with strength and resolve, to live my life with the courage to move forward despite the lingering echoes of fear. Story 24. It was a crisp October when an email arrived that would shatter my sense of security. I'd been home all day, working in silence and enjoying the quiet. My laptop was my only connection to the outside world, a tool for emails, schedules, and the occasional video. But that night, something different appeared in my inbox. The message was blank. No sender, no subject line. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something about it made me pause. Hesitation and unease battled with curiosity. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a single video file. My heart thudded as I clicked on it and waited for it to load. The footage sent ice through my veins. It showed rooms of my house from angles I didn't recognize. The living room, the kitchen, even my bedroom, all captured with an unnerving clarity. Most horrifying of all was seeing myself, moving about my day completely unaware that I was being watched. The video spanned hours of surveillance. It showed me making coffee, working at my desk, reading on the couch. Every moment had been recorded and edited seamlessly, like a highlight reel of my private life. There were no glitches, no signs of tampering, just a silent, all-seeing gaze. When the footage ended, a single line of text appeared on the screen. "I'm always watching." The words were simple, but their meaning hit me like a punch. My forehead dampened with cold sweat as my mind raced. This wasn't just a breach of privacy. It was a violation of the one place I thought I was safe. I tried to trace the email, but every path led to a dead end, untraceable, the IP masked. Whoever had done this had covered their tracks well. That night, I tore through every corner of my house, searching for hidden cameras or signs of intrusion. I even climbed into the attic and behind the walls. But there was nothing out of the ordinary. No hidden devices, no signs of forced entry. It was as if the footage had been captured by an invisible, all-seeing eye. Desperate for help, I called the police. They assured me they would investigate, but without concrete evidence, their hands were tied. They recommended installing security cameras and remaining vigilant, a suggestion that did little to ease the dread coiled inside me. The following days blurred into paranoia. I couldn't shake the sense that someone was lurking just out of sight, tracking my every move. I checked the locks on my doors and windows over and over again. I avoided staying alone in the house whenever possible. My home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. I took their advice seriously. I installed an array of security cameras inside and outside, covering every angle and potential entry point. I upgraded my alarm system and even hired a private investigator, hoping they might uncover something the police had missed. But despite these measures, the feeling of being watched never lifted. The unease began to spill beyond my front door. I grew wary of strangers, avoided dark alleys, and changed my daily routines. Pepper spray became a constant companion. My phone stayed in my hand at all times, as though it might ward off whatever presence was waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows. Then one evening, as I reviewed the footage from my new security system, my heart stopped. In one of the feeds, a brief flicker of movement caught my eye. A shadowy figure, there for a second, and then gone. I rewound the footage. The figure appeared again, but the glimpse was too fleeting to reveal any details. The figure lingered at the edges of my property, watching from a distance, a shapeless presence that sent a wave of dread crashing over me. I immediately reported the sighting to both the police and the private investigator, but the shadowy figure remained elusive, slipping away like smoke each time I tried to pin it down. They suggested it might be someone hacking into or monitoring my cameras, perhaps using them to intimidate me further. The uncertainty of not knowing who or what was behind this torment was almost worse than any direct threat. Weeks passed. The raw terror I had first felt dulled, but never disappeared, morphing instead into a persistent, grinding anxiety. I became consumed with a need to feel safe, to regain control over my life. I changed the locks yet again, upgraded my security system, and layered precaution upon precaution. I even enrolled in self-defense classes, hoping to build confidence and learn how to protect myself if the unseen watcher ever stepped into the open. Despite my efforts, the experience left a lasting scar. The invasion of my privacy and the haunting message from the video had shattered my sense of security. The constant vigilance took its toll, draining my mental and emotional reserves until I found myself withdrawing from others, isolating more and more, focused only on survival. The identity of the person behind the email and the footage remained a mystery, and the sense of being watched never truly faded. Though the security measures I implemented gave me a fragile semblance of control, the experience became a harsh reminder of how vulnerable we are, even in our own homes. The fear of the unseen observer lingered like a ghostly presence, keeping me on edge, always questioning who might be watching from the shadows. Story 25. It began on an otherwise uneventful evening. I had just settled into my favorite armchair with a book, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the room like a low, steady lullaby. As I turned a page, faint scratching sound drifted from somewhere within the walls. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling, old wood shifting in its frame, or maybe a loose wire brushing against plaster. Old homes make strange noises. It was nothing unusual, but the sound didn't fade. Over the days that followed, the scratching grew more frequent and insistent. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like something or someone trying to communicate. Worse still, it seemed to follow me. When I sat in the living room, it came from the wall behind me. If I moved to the kitchen, it shifted there as well, as though whatever was making it was shadowing my every step. The noise became a constant reminder of an unseen presence, a subtle pressure that grew heavier with each passing day. My first thought was pests, mice, rats, something mundane. But when the noises refused to subside, I called an exterminator for a professional opinion. He arrived one cool autumn morning, his toolkit clinking as he carried it inside, his demeanor confident and casual. He began his inspection methodically, checking under the sink, behind the refrigerator, even in the attic. He set traps and placed bait stations at key points, certain he would uncover the source of the sound. I tried to explain the unnerving part, the way the scratching seemed to follow me, the way it intensified whenever I tried to track it down. But my words sounded strange, even to my own ears. The exterminator just nodded, his expression unreadable, and went back to his work. He nodded, though I could see the skepticism flicker in his eyes. Old houses can have all sorts of quirks, he said. We'll get it sorted out. Hours passed as he worked, checking every nook and cranny with professional precision. When he was finished, he looked at me with a puzzled expression. I didn't find anything unusual, he admitted. No droppings, no nests, not even any signs of gnawing. It's all clean. A pang of frustration gripped me. If it wasn't pests, then what was it? What was causing the scratching? I thanked him for his time and paid him for his services. But as he left, the unease only deepened. The scratching continued. If anything, it grew louder. It was no longer a faint, almost ignorable noise. It had become a persistent, frantic rhythm, echoing through the walls like something trapped and desperate. Whenever I moved to investigate, the sound shifted, always just out of reach, like it was playing a cruel game. Desperate for answers, I began to document the occurrences, jotting down times, locations, intensity, anything that might reveal a pattern. But the scratching remained stubbornly erratic, the only constant being its inescapable presence. One night, after weeks of enduring the relentless noise, I decided to confront it head on. Armed with a flashlight and a hammer, I carefully removed a section of drywall in the area where the scratching was loudest. My heart pounded as I peeled back the wall, revealing a hollow cavity behind it. I shone the flashlight inside, holding my breath. Nothing, just empty space and insulation. No rodents, no wires, no hidden passage. Disappointed, but not deterred, I probed deeper, searching for any clue. An old conduit, a forgotten crawl space, anything that might explain the noises. But the walls were empty and silent, as if mocking me. And yet, the scratching persisted. Now it seemed more insistent, more invasive, like it was coming from the very heart of the house. It became an oppressive soundtrack to my every move, a relentless reminder that something was wrong. I tried to ignore it, but the house would not let me. The noise had become a part of my daily life, an inescapable soundtrack that pulsed beneath everything I did. I thought about calling in a contractor, someone who could tear apart the walls and find the source. But each time I hesitated. What if there was nothing there? No logical explanation, no pest, no wiring fault. Just me, unraveling. The fear of being dismissed as paranoid kept me silent. As the scratching persisted, I withdrew. Friends stopped visiting. I stopped inviting them. I couldn't bear the questions or the awkward explanations about the sounds that plagued my home. More and more, I sought refuge outside, in the fresh air and open spaces. But even then, the noise haunted me, lingering like a shadow I couldn't escape. My home, once a sanctuary, had become a cage. Then came the storm. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like something alive. Inside, the scratching reached a fever pitch. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was movement, a frantic, desperate energy that seemed to writhe through the walls themselves. I sat alone in the darkened living room. The only illumination, the flash of distant lightning. Each crack of thunder made the sound seem louder, closer, as though the house itself was clawing from within. A deep, primal fear rooted itself in my chest. This wasn't just an annoyance. This was a threat. In desperation, I called a friend, someone who dabbled in the paranormal, a person who wouldn't laugh off my story. She arrived that night, intrigued by the strangeness of it all, bringing her equipment in a battered black case. We spent hours moving from room to room. Her devices flickered and hummed, but registered nothing out of the ordinary. She set up digital recorders, conducted EVP sessions, whispered questions into the dark. The walls answered only with the relentless scratching, and used various sensors, but there was no evidence of anything supernatural or abnormal. She was as perplexed as I was unable to provide any answers. As dawn approached, she left promising to follow up with any findings. I was left alone with the scratching, which for the first time seemed to quiet down. As if acknowledging the end of the investigation, I felt a mixture of relief and despair, realizing that the mystery of the scratching might never be fully resolved. The following days were marked by a tentative peace, the scratching reduced to a faint whisper, yet the experience had left a lasting impact. The house, once a place of comfort, now held a shadow of unease. I remained vigilant, always listening for the telltale signs that the scratching might return. Despite the quiet, the sense of dread lingered. The scratching had been a haunting reminder of the unknown, a phenomenon that defied explanation and left me questioning the boundaries between reality and fear. The house had become a symbol of the mysteries that can lurk just beyond our understanding, a reminder that sometimes the true source of our fears may never be fully revealed. Story 26. The day began like any other. I woke up early, brewed my coffee, and moved through my usual routine. The apartment was quiet, a peaceful sanctuary, my refuge from the noise of the outside world. But when I checked my mail that morning, I noticed a small package waiting for me. It was plain, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. My name was written neatly in careful, deliberate handwriting, but there were no other clues about who might have sent it. Curiosity got the better of me. I carried it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and peeled away the wrapping. Inside was a book, an old, leather-bound volume, its cover cracked and worn with age. The title was barely legible, obscured by dust and grime. I turned it over, but there were no markings, no publisher, no hint of where it had come from. Intrigued, but not alarmed, I set it aside and went about my day. Yet my mind kept drifting back to the package, circling it like a moth to a flame. By evening, I couldn't resist. I sat down at the table, pulled the book closer, and opened it. A folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages. My heart skipped as I picked it up and slowly unfolded it. You don't know me, but I know you. The words were handwritten, precise, deliberate, and they sent a chill down my spine. The message was cryptic, unsettling, and intimate in a way that felt invasive. Who could have sent this, and why? The anonymity of it all only deepened my unease. I took a breath and began flipping through the book's pages, hoping to find some context, some clue. What I found inside was even more disturbing. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, observations and comments about my life, my daily routine, my work schedule, even my most recent activities had been carefully documented. It was as though the book had been meticulously crafted to chronicle my every move. The notes were fragmented, sometimes incoherent, but the message behind them was unmistakable. Someone had been watching me, tracking me, compiling a chilling record of my life. There were references to private conversations I'd had with friends, descriptions of places I'd recently visited, even mentions of my family members. Every line I read felt like another blow. It wasn't just unsettling, it was invasive, a violation so personal it left me feeling exposed and breathless. This wasn't simply a book, it was a mirror held up to my life by an unseen hand. My pulse quickened as the realization sank in. Someone out there knew intimate details about me, details that should have been mine alone. Determined to act, I contacted the police. I showed them the book and the note, explaining everything as calmly as I could. Officer Ramirez, the one who took my report, looked concerned, but spoke cautiously. We'll look into it, she said, but without any identifying information, tracing the sender will be difficult. I nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. The police assured me they would investigate, but I knew such cases rarely moved quickly, and even more rarely ended with answers. In the meantime, I had to protect myself. I began installing new security measures in my apartment. I upgraded the alarm system, added motion detectors, and mounted cameras to cover every possible angle. I changed the locks on my doors and windows, determined to make sure no one could enter without my knowledge. But even with these precautions, every sound, every flicker of movement outside my apartment became a trigger. Anxiety coiled tighter with each passing day. I felt like prey being stalked by an invisible predator. I was living in a constant state of alert, always on edge, waiting for the next unsettling event. Every sound felt amplified, every flicker of movement a potential threat. I began to alter my daily routine, varying my schedule, avoiding predictable patterns that might make it easier for someone to track my movements. I stopped discussing my plans or activities with anyone, even close friends or family, for fear that someone might be listening or intercepting my conversations. The fear of being watched had become all-consuming, creeping into every corner of my life. Despite these efforts, the sense of being stalked never fully faded. The book had left an indelible mark on my psyche, and each day felt like a test of my sanity. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always lurking just out of sight, watching and waiting. In the following weeks, the strange incidents increased. Sometimes I caught fleeting shadows moving just beyond my windows. Other times I heard faint, unfamiliar noises in the hallway, small sounds that sent my heart racing. Paranoia began to erode my relationships, isolating me from those I once trusted. The book and the note remained locked away in a safe, but their presence still haunted me, like a talisman of dread. My nights became sleepless, my days a blur of relentless worry. Then, at last, the police called with an update. The police had identified a few leads, but nothing conclusive. They advised me to maintain my security measures and remain vigilant. Their assurances offered only a small measure of comfort, but at least I knew they were trying. As time passed, the notes and the book remained a chilling reminder of the invasion of my privacy. Although the physical threats seemed to diminish, the psychological impact lingered. My apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground for my peace of mind. Despite the ongoing fear, I tried to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. I resumed my social activities, forcing myself to rebuild a sense of security. Though the shadow of the book still loomed large, the experience had left me more cautious, more aware, forever changed by the unsettling reality that there are people in the world willing to go to great lengths to invade your privacy and control your life. The book and the notes served as a constant reminder of the fragility of security and the power of fear. Even as I moved forward and tried to put the experience behind me, the knowledge that someone had been watching, documenting, intruding, observing, would always remain a haunting memory, lingering just beneath the surface of my everyday life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Stories. Story 1. Renting the old, quaint house for the summer felt like stepping into another world. Nestled in the countryside, it was everything I had hoped for, a perfect escape from the chaos of city life. The house exuded charm with its ivy-covered walls, creaky wooden floors, and the scent of blooming flowers drifting through the open windows. The days passed in a gentle rhythm, long walks through the surrounding fields, quiet evenings with a good book, and the simple pleasure of solitude. Yet, as the weeks went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something hidden just beneath the surface of this idyllic retreat. I discovered it sooner than I expected. A few days after moving in, while storing boxes in the dim light of a single bare bulb, I noticed a door at the far end of the unfinished basement. The space smelled of damp concrete, a place that seemed to hold secrets. The door itself was small, almost lost in the shadows, made of heavy wood with an old-fashioned brass handle that caught the faint glow. Curious, I reached for it, but the handle wouldn't turn. Locked. When I asked the landlord the next day, his answer was curt. That room is off limits. It's not part of the rental agreement. Just leave it alone. His tone left no room for argument, but it only sharpened my curiosity. Every time I went down to the basement, my eyes drifted toward that door, my mind spinning with possibilities. What could he be hiding? One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, I found a key tucked away in the back of a kitchen drawer, as if someone had hidden it there on purpose. The moment I saw it, I knew where it belonged. Heart pounding, I carried it downstairs. The old steps creaking underfoot. I hesitated, the metal cold in my hand. Part of me wanted to respect the landlord's warning, but curiosity won. The key slid into the lock and turned with a soft click. The door opened to to reveal a room unlike anything else in the house. It was immaculate, a stark contrast to the dusty basement. The air inside was cool and still, as if sealed off for years. Everything was perfectly arranged. A small table with a chair, shelves lined with old books. Inside, against the far wall, stood a large cabinet filled with trinkets. But what truly caught my attention were the photographs. They were everywhere, covering the walls, the shelves, even scattered across the floor. Hundreds of them, all in black and white, each one carefully framed, arranged in neat rows, and every single photograph was of me. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped closer, scanning the images. They showed me in the garden, sitting on the porch, reading in the living room. Some were recent, others appeared to have been taken the moment I arrived. The more I looked, the more unsettled I became. Who had taken these? How had I not noticed someone watching me? My breath quickened as I realized that some of the photographs were from inside the house. Shots of me cooking in the kitchen, lounging in the living room, even sitting at the desk in the study. The angles were strange, as though the photographer had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment. I couldn't bear it any longer. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it and rushed upstairs, the key heavy in my pocket. I shoved it back into the drawer where I had found it, as if putting it away could somehow undo what I had seen. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. I kept expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway, someone sneaking through the house. But the night passed in silence. The house was still, too still. By morning, I tried to convince myself it had all been a mistake. Perhaps the photos had been left behind by a previous tenant, someone with a bizarre hobby. Maybe the landlord didn't even know about them. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. When I finally worked up the courage to return to the basement, the door to the hidden room stood exactly as I had left it. I lingered there, hand on the key, torn between leaving it alone and finding out the truth. In the end, curiosity won. I opened the door, and my breath caught in my throat. The room was exactly the same, except for one horrifying detail. The photographs had been replaced. The new ones were in color, sharp and vivid, and every single one showed me asleep in my bed. My heart pounded as I stared at the images, each taken from a different angle, as if someone had been standing right next to me while I slept. The sheets were the same. The position of my body matched exactly how I remembered lying the night before. The realization hit me like a wave of ice. Someone had been in my room while I slept. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the threshold as I fled the room. The key slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. But I didn't care. I bolted up the stairs, my mind a whirlwind of panic. I had to get out. Within an hour, my things were packed, and I was in my car, speeding away from the house as fast as I could. I didn't tell the landlord why I was leaving early, didn't even ask for a refund. All I knew was that I could not stay there another night. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the window, watching me leave. But the house remained still and silent, its secrets tucked neatly behind its quaint exterior. I never found out who took those photos or why they were there, but the memory of that room and the feeling of being watched stayed with me long after I left. I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes doors are better left locked. Story 2. At work, everything was routine. I'd been with the company for a few years, settling into the predictable rhythm of my daily tasks. My desk, tucked away in a quiet corner of the office, had become a second home. Photos of family, a couple of plants to liven up the space. I had never had a reason to feel uneasy there until the notes started appearing. It was a Monday morning when I found the first one. I arrived at my desk, set my coffee down, and opened the drawer to grab a pen. Inside was a small folded piece of paper with my name scrawled neatly across the front. At first, I thought it was harmless, maybe a leftover from a team-building exercise I'd forgotten about. But as I unfolded the note, a chill ran down my spine. The message inside was brief but unsettling. "I know what you did last summer." My mind raced. What could that mean? I hadn't done anything unusual the previous summer. No secrets, no scandals, just a normal vacation with friends. I laughed it off, chalking it up to a coworker with a strange sense of humor. Crumpling the note, I tossed it into the trash, determined to forget about it. But the notes kept coming. Every few days, a new one appeared, slipped into my desk drawer, tucked between papers, even hidden under my keyboard, and each note was more personal than the last. They contained details no one else should know, my childhood fears, my private anxieties, even things I had never spoken aloud. The handwriting was always the same, perfectly neat, with a slight slant I didn't recognize. But the messages were anything but neat. They hinted at my insecurities, my deepest fears, and always ended with a vague but chilling statement. "I'm closer than you think. You can't hide from me." By the third note, paranoia had taken hold. I started scanning the office, looking for someone watching me, someone sneaking away from my desk. But everything seemed normal. Everyone went about their business as if nothing was wrong. Oblivious to the storm inside me, I confided in a close friend at work, Sarah, hoping she might have some insight. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concern. "Are you sure it's not just someone playing a prank?" she asked, trying to reassure me. But the look in her eyes told me she was just as unsettled as I was. "Maybe you should talk to HR, she suggested. So I did. I went to HR, feeling foolish, but desperate to regain some control. The HR manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Dempsey, listened to my concerns with a stony expression. She assured me they would look into it and asked if I had any idea who might be responsible. But I didn't. I had no enemies at work, no one who would go to such lengths to unnerve me. Days passed after my meeting with HR, and I heard nothing. No updates, no explanations. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Every time I opened my desk drawer, my heart would race, expecting another note. But for a while, there were none. Just as I started to convince myself it was over, that maybe HR had quietly dealt with the issue, the notes returned. This time, they were worse. The messages were no longer merely cryptic. They were disturbing. One note simply read, "I know you're scared." Another said, "You're not safe here." The last straw came on a Friday afternoon. It had been a long, draining week, and I was exhausted. As I sat at my desk, trying to finish a report, I opened my drawer to grab a file and found another note. My breath caught in my throat as I read, "I'm watching you right now." The words sent a jolt of terror through me. An intense pressure built in my chest, like a weight pressing down. My hands trembled as I clutched the note, my mind spinning. The room felt suffocating. The air was thick with tension. I could feel a gaze on me, heavy, invasive. My heart pounded as I slowly turned, expecting to find someone standing there. But the office was empty. The cubicles were deserted. The usual hum of conversations and ringing phones replaced by an eerie silence. It was late afternoon. Most of my colleagues had already left for the weekend. The lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows across the room. I stood, my legs shaky, and walked around my desk, scanning every corner of the office. I checked behind partitions, peered into empty conference rooms, even looked out the windows. Nothing. No one. The feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at me. My rational mind told me it was just paranoia, fueled by the notes. But a deeper, more primal part of me knew better. Unable to shake the fear, I gathered my things and left the office in a hurry. I didn't look back, afraid of what I might see, or not see, if I did. That weekend, I barely slept, haunted by the thought that someone out there knew me, knew my fears, and was toying with me. When Monday came, I dreaded returning to work. My desk was just as I'd left it. I hesitated before opening the drawer, my heart pounding. No new note, no sign anything had been disturbed. For a brief moment, relief washed over me, until I noticed something else. The note from Friday was gone, the one that had said, "I'm watching you right now." I had left it in the drawer. Now it was missing. Someone had taken it. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Whoever was doing this was closer than I had ever imagined. I went back to HR, demanding answers. Mrs. Dempsey seemed more annoyed than concerned. "We've checked the security footage," she said curtly. "No one has been tampering with your desk. Are you sure you didn't misplace the notes yourself?" Her words stung. I left her office, feeling more alone than ever. The notes eventually stopped, but the fear remained. I could no longer concentrate at work, always on edge, always looking over my shoulder. I never found out who was behind the notes, or how they knew such intimate details about my life. But the experience left a scar, a lingering sense of unease I could never quite shake. Even now, I sometimes catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me from the shadows. Story 3. The first time the house alarm went off in the middle of the night, I dismissed it as a glitch. I had only just moved into the old house a few weeks prior, and though the previous owner had assured me everything was in working order, I figured the system was just showing its age. Groggy and half asleep, I shuffled downstairs to disarm it, my heart still pounding from the sudden jolt. I checked every window and door, making sure they were locked and secure. Everything seemed fine, so I chalked it up to a technical error and went back to bed. But it didn't stop there. The alarm continued to go off, night after night, always at the same time, 2:47 a.m. Each time it happened, I would get up, search the house, and find nothing out of place. I even called the alarm company. They sent a technician to inspect the system. No issues, no signs of tampering, no malfunction, and yet the alarm persisted, like it had a mind of its own. One night, about a week after the alarm first began acting up, I found myself in the basement, sorting through old boxes left behind by the previous owner. Time slipped away as I sifted through dusty memorabilia. That's when I heard it. The sound of someone moving around upstairs. The soft creak of floorboards. The faint shuffle of footsteps. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, straining to listen. These weren't the random groans of an old house. These were deliberate footsteps. The measured tread of someone walking from room to room. Quickly, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that there was someone in my house. She told me to stay on the line and remain quiet until the police arrived. Above me, the footsteps continued, moving from the kitchen to the living room, then toward the staircase. I crouched behind a stack of boxes, clutching the phone, praying whoever it was wouldn't come down to the basement. The minutes dragged on like hours, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Finally, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside, followed by doors slamming shut. The police. Relief washed over me. But the footsteps didn't stop. They carried on, undisturbed by the arrival of the authorities. I stayed hidden until I heard the officers calling out, announcing their presence. Only then did I emerge from the basement, my hands trembling as I climbed the stairs to meet them. The officers searched the entire house, room by room. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No evidence that anyone had been inside. They checked the windows and doors just as I had. Everything was secure. They even reviewed the footage from the security cameras I'd installed around the property. Nothing. No one entering or leaving. No shadowy figures creeping through the halls. It was as if the sounds I'd heard had never happened at all. But I knew better. I had heard those footsteps. I had felt the presence of someone or something moving through my home. The officers tried to reassure me, suggesting it might have been the house settling or an animal outside that I'd mistaken for an intruder. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. They thought I was overreacting, that maybe I was just spooked from living alone in an unfamiliar place. After the police left, I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself they were probably right, that maybe I was just hearing things. But deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong with the house, something I couldn't explain. The alarm kept going off, always at 2:47 a.m., and every time it did, that same cold dread washed over me. A few nights later, I decided to stay up and watch the security footage in real time, determined to catch whatever was triggering the alarm. I sat in front of the monitor, the house dark and silent around me, the only light coming from the screen. 2:47 a.m. came and went, and for a moment I thought maybe the disturbances had stopped. But then the alarm blared, shattering the silence. I quickly rewound the footage, my eyes scanning the screen for any sign of movement. There was nothing. No intruder, no animal, nothing that could have set off the alarm. But as I listened closely, I heard something that sent a chill down my spine. Faint, almost imperceptible. There were footsteps, muffled, distant, but unmistakably human. They were there on the recordings, yet when I played it back for anyone else, they heard nothing. It was as if the sounds were meant for me alone. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I became obsessed with the alarm and the footsteps, spending hours watching the footage, trying to catch even the smallest anomaly. But no matter how many times I watched, the result was always the same. Nothing visible, only those faint, ghostly footsteps echoing through the house. I started to avoid going to bed, dreading the moment when the alarm would go off again. I'd lie awake, listening, waiting for the footsteps to start. Sometimes I thought I could hear whispers, too, just at the edge of hearing, as if someone were trying to speak to me from the other side of the walls. But the words were always just out of reach, leaving me with nothing but a growing sense of unease. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left the house, staying with a friend while I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't live like that, constantly on edge, feeling like I was being watched, haunted by something I couldn't see. I called in another technician, another round of police, but nothing helped. The alarm continued to malfunction. The footsteps continued to echo in the recordings, and I knew that whatever was in the house, it wasn't going to leave me alone. The final night I spent there, the alarm went off at 2:47 a.m. as usual, but this time, when I listened to the recording, the footsteps were louder, clearer, as if they were right beside me. And this time, I heard something else too. A low, guttural whisper. Just one word, but it was enough to send me fleeing into the night. Leave. Story 4. It had been an ordinary night out with friends. Dinner at our favorite restaurant, followed by drinks at a local bar. The laughter, the stories, the easy camaraderie, all of it had made the evening one of those perfect nights that leaves you smiling long after it's over. But that happiness shattered the next morning, the moment I reached for my wallet and found it missing. At first, I thought I had simply misplaced it. I retraced my steps, searching my apartment, checking every pocket, every corner, every possible place it could have fallen. I even called the restaurant and the bar, hoping someone had found it and turned it in, but it was nowhere to be found. As the day wore on, the sinking realization settled in. My wallet was gone for good. I had no choice but to report it stolen. I canceled my credit cards, filed a police report, and began the tedious process of replacing my ID and other important documents. The inconvenience was bad enough, but what truly unsettled me was the thought of someone out there having access to my personal information, someone who could be using it for who knows what purpose. A few days later, as I was heading out for work, I noticed an envelope slipped under my front door. It was unmarked, no return address, just a plain white envelope with my name scrawled across the front in messy handwriting. Puzzled, I picked it up and opened it. Inside was my wallet. For a moment, relief washed over me, until I opened it and saw that it had been emptied of all its contents. My credit cards, my ID, my cash, everything was gone, except for a single slip of paper tucked into one of the card slots. I pulled it out, and my heart skipped a beat as I read the message written on it in large, bold letters. I know where you live. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My hands shook as I held the note. The words were simple, but they carried a menacing certainty that made my blood run cold. Someone had stolen my wallet, removed everything inside, and then returned it to me with this chilling message. Whoever it was, they knew where I lived. They had been to my home, close enough to slip the envelope under my door without me noticing. Fear gripped me as I stared at the note, my mind racing with questions. Who had done this? Why return the wallet? What did they want? But no matter how hard I tried to piece it together, I couldn't make sense of it. All I knew was that I was no longer safe in my own home. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside sent my heart pounding. I barely slept, jumping at every little sound, convinced someone was trying to break in. Finally, I decided to take action. The first thing I did was change the locks on my door. The idea that someone might have a key to my apartment filled me with dread, so I called a locksmith immediately. I stood and watched as he installed the new locks, double-checking to make sure everything was secure. But even that didn't fully ease my fears. Next, I moved some of my belongings to a friend's place. I didn't have the time or resources to relocate entirely, but I thought that if I could make it look like I wasn't staying there full time, it might deter whoever was watching me. I packed up some clothes, important documents, and anything of value, spending a few nights crashing on my friend's couch. But the fear followed me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was away from home. I also installed a security system, cameras, motion detectors, alarms. The company assured me that my apartment was now one of the safest in the city, but I couldn't shake the unease. Every time I entered my apartment, I'd check the footage from the cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever had left that note. But nothing ever showed up. It was as if the person had simply vanished, leaving me in a state of perpetual dread. Days turned into weeks, and gradually, the intensity of my fear began to subside, though it never completely disappeared. I started to regain some sense of normality, though I remained hyper-vigilant. I avoided going out late at night, kept my curtains drawn, and checked the locks multiple times before going to bed. But the memory of that note haunted me, a constant reminder that someone out there had invaded my life in the most personal way possible. I became obsessed with trying to figure out who had done it. I went over every detail of that night, out with friends, trying to remember if anyone had been acting strangely, or if I had seen someone following me. Nothing stood out. I even considered the possibility that it was some kind of sick joke. But the note didn't feel like a prank. It felt like a threat, one I couldn't ignore. Months passed. While the fear no longer consumed me, it had left its mark. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, less trusting of others. The feeling of being watched never completely left me, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow. I knew I had to move on, but part of me would always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if that anonymous threat would ever come to pass. In the end, I never found out who took my wallet or why they returned it with that ominous note. The mystery remained unsolved, a lingering question with no answer. But the experience changed me. It made me realize how vulnerable we can be, how easily our sense of security can be shattered by a single anonymous act. And it taught me to be more careful, to never take my safety for granted, because once you've been marked, the fear of what might happen next never truly goes away. Story 5. The first text came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, finishing up some emails, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another spam message. But something made me pause. I opened it, expecting the usual nonsense. Instead, what I read made my skin crawl. "Nice blue shirt today. You look good in that color." I frowned, looking down at my blue shirt. It wasn't an unusual outfit choice, and it could have been a coincidence, but something about the message felt off. How did this person know what I was wearing? I looked around the office, trying to spot anyone acting suspicious, but everyone was engrossed in their work. I dismissed it as a weird prank and went back to my tasks. But the messages didn't stop. Over the next few days, more texts came in, each one more unsettling than the last. They detailed my routines, the places I'd been, even conversations. One morning, I received a text that read, "Did you enjoy your coffee at the corner cafe?" The barista gave you an extra shot, didn't she? I froze, staring at the screen. I had indeed stopped at the cafe that morning, and the barista had given me an extra shot of espresso. My heart raced as I reread the message. How did they know that? I hadn't told anyone. At first, I tried to brush it off as a prank. Maybe a friend was playing a joke on me. Or perhaps it was someone from the office who'd seen me at the cafe. But as the days passed, the messages grew more specific, more personal. They started predicting things that would happen to me. Minor accidents, small misfortunes. Not life-threatening, but unsettling. One day, as I was leaving for work, I received a text. Be careful on your way out. You might trip on the last step. I paused at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. The last step of the staircase had always been a bit tricky, but I'd never tripped on it before. I shook my head, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as I descended the stairs, I hesitated at the last step. In that moment of hesitation, I lost my balance. I stumbled, catching myself on the banister just in time. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the bottom, the words of the text echoing in my mind. I decided to take action. I tried tracing the number, but every attempt led to a dead end. It was as if the number didn't exist, a ghost in the system. I reported the texts to the police, but without any real threat. They couldn't do much. They suggested I change my number, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted to know who was behind this. The idea that someone was watching me, knowing so much about my life, was terrifying, but I also needed answers. The texts continued, each one a reminder that someone out there was observing me. You're running late today. Maybe skip the coffee and catch the earlier train. They predicted delays, weather changes, even the arrival of a package I hadn't been expecting. I started feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. How could someone know so much? How could they predict these things with such accuracy? I began to withdraw, avoiding my usual routines, hoping to throw off whoever was watching me. I changed my commute, stopped going to my favorite spots, even started taking different routes home. But the texts followed me, commenting on my new routines, almost as if they were taunting me for trying to escape. Nice try with a detour, but I still see you. Sleep became elusive. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, dreading what I might read. The constant anxiety wore me down. I started jumping at shadows, seeing threats where there were none. I even considered leaving town for a while, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was sending the texts would still find me, no matter where I went. And then, just as abruptly as they had started, the texts stopped. I noticed it one day when I realized I hadn't received a message in over 24 hours. At first, I felt a sense of relief, thinking that maybe, finally, it was over. But the relief was short-lived, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. Why had they stopped? Had they moved on to someone else? Or was this part of some larger plan? The days turned into weeks, and still there were no more texts. I began to relax, though the memory of those weeks of torment lingered. The silence, however, was almost worse than the texts themselves. I found myself constantly on edge, waiting for the next message, the next sign that someone was still watching. But nothing came. As the weeks passed, I tried to return to my normal life. But the knowledge that someone had known so much about me, had predicted so many of my movements, hung over me like a storm cloud. I became more cautious, more guarded, not just with my routines, but with the people around me. The experience had shaken me to my core, leaving a scar that time would never fully heal. Months later, I was sitting alone in my apartment, the memory of the texts, a distant but ever-present shadow in my mind. My phone buzzed on the table, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The familiar anxiety returned in an instant. When I picked it up, though, it was only a notification from a friend, nothing more. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. But as I set the phone down, a single thought lingered, chilling me to the bone. Somewhere out there, someone still knew too much about me. Story 6. When I first moved into my new neighborhood, I was thrilled. The tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and friendly faces made it feel like the perfect place to start fresh. My small house at the end of the cul-de-sac felt cozy and inviting, and I quickly settled into a comfortable routine. The neighbors were welcoming, especially the man living next door. He introduced himself as Alan, a middle-aged man with a warm smile and a seemingly genuine interest in helping me get acclimated to the area. At first, I appreciated Alan's friendliness. He offered to help with my yard work, invited me over for coffee, and gave me recommendations for local services. It was nice to have someone so willing to lend a hand, especially when you're new to a place. We would chat occasionally over the fence, and he always seemed eager to learn more about me, where I worked, my hobbies, even my family background. I found his interest a bit excessive, but I dismissed it as harmless neighborly curiosity. However, as the weeks passed, Alan's behavior began to shift from friendly to unsettling. He started asking increasingly personal questions. He wanted to know the details of my work schedule, the names of my friends, even why I wasn't dating anyone. There was something about the way he asked, an intensity in his eyes that made me uneasy. I began to distance myself, making excuses when he invited me over or tried to engage me in long conversations. But Alan was persistent. He always seemed to be outside when I left for work or returned home, waving and calling out to me as if he were watching for my comings and goings. The feeling that he was always there, always watching, became harder to shake. Then one day I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a Sunday morning, and I was tidying up my front porch, arranging the flower pots that lined the steps. As I bent down to move one of the pots, something metallic caught my eye. Hidden behind the leaves was a small black object. I picked it up, and my heart skipped a beat when I realized what it was. A camera. A tiny, discreet camera positioned perfectly to capture everything happening at my front door. My hands trembled as I held it, a sickening feeling of violation washing over me. Someone had been watching me, recording my every move as I entered and left my home. The sense of safety I had once felt in my own space was shattered in an instant. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Alan's odd behavior, his obsession with my routine, it all pointed to him. But why? What was he hoping to gain by invading my privacy like this? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more disturbing than the last. With a deep breath, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed answers. I marched over to Alan's house, camera in hand, and knocked on the door. When he opened it, his expression shifted from surprise to something else, something I couldn't quite place. "I found this," I said, holding up the camera. It was hidden behind a flower pot on my porch. Care to explain? For a moment, Alan's face was blank, as if he was processing the situation. Then he let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, that? It's just for security purposes. You can never be too careful these days, right?" I stared at him, disbelief and anger boiling inside me. Security purposes? You've been spying on me. That's not normal, Alan. That's not okay. Alan's smile faltered, and his eyes took on a pleading look. "I didn't mean to upset you. I was just trying to look out for you. You're new here, and I thought it would be good to keep an eye on things. You know, in case anything happened." His words did nothing to ease my anger. If anything, they only made me feel more uneasy. This wasn't about security. This was about control. He wanted to know everything about me, to monitor my every move. "I'm not comfortable with this," I said firmly. "You had no right to put a camera on my property without my consent. I want you to remove any other cameras you might have placed and leave me alone. Do you understand?" Alan's face darkened, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something cold in his eyes. But then he nodded, his expression softening back into that friendly, almost apologetic demeanor. "Of course. I'm sorry. I'll remove the camera. It won't happen again." I didn't trust him. There was something about his quick change in demeanor that felt disingenuous, like he was just telling me what I wanted to hear. But I had made my point, and I hoped that would be the end of it. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on my surroundings, wary of any further invasions of my privacy. Alan stayed out of sight, and I didn't see him lurking around the way he used to. But the sense of unease didn't fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when there was no one around. That's when I decided it was time to move. The thought of staying in a place where someone had violated my privacy so blatantly was too much to bear. I found a new apartment across town and packed my things as quickly as I could. As I drove away from that house for the last time, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Moving was the right choice, but the experience had left a lasting mark. The idea that someone had been watching me so closely, so obsessively, was haunting. Even in my new home, far from Alan's prying eyes, I found myself constantly checking the windows, scanning for hidden cameras, and feeling a chill whenever I thought I saw a shadow move outside. Alan was just a neighbor, a man who had seemed friendly and harmless at first. But beneath that facade was something dark, something that made me question everyone around me, wondering what secrets they might be hiding behind their smiles. Story 7. It started innocently enough, just a small annoyance. I shrugged off without much thought. My phone would ring late at night, always from an unknown number. At first I assumed it was some telemarketer who had managed to slip through my call filters, or perhaps someone dialing the wrong number. When I answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. I would wait a few seconds, say hello a couple of times, and then hang up when no one responded. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it. The calls persisted, always at odd hours. They came just as I was settling into bed, my eyes heavy with sleep. It wasn't every night, but often enough that I began to dread the sound of my phone ringing. Each time the same routine played out, my phone would light up, I would answer, and there would be nothing but silence on the other end. After a week of this, I decided to trace the number. I figured it couldn't hurt to know who or what was behind these calls. I used one of those online services that claimed to trace unknown numbers, but when the results came back, they showed nothing. No name, no address, not even a location. It was as if the number didn't exist. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong, but I dismissed it as just another glitch in the system. The next night, the calls continued, but something had changed. Instead of the usual silence, I started hearing strange noises, like breathing or faint whispers. Just before the line went dead, the first time it happened, I felt a chill run down my spine. The breathing was slow, deliberate, like someone was listening closely, waiting for something. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen as if it would somehow reveal the identity of the caller. But it was just the same unknown number. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, even though I was alone in my apartment. I began to check the locks on my doors and windows every night, making sure they were secure. I even started keeping a small lamp on beside my bed, the soft glow comforting me in the darkness. But the calls continued, relentless and unsettling. A few days later, I told my friend Kate about what was happening. We were sitting in a coffee shop, the bustle of the city around us providing a stark contrast to the eerie silence of those late-night calls. "That's creepy," she said, her eyes wide. "Have you thought about changing your number?" "I have, but something's stopping me," I admitted, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. "It's like I need to know who's behind these calls. It's getting under my skin." Kate gave me a concerned look. "You should be careful. It might be some kind of prank, but it could also be something more serious." I nodded, but I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't just ignore the calls, not when they were beginning to feel so personal. There was a growing unease in the pit of my stomach, a sense that something was very wrong. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone in hand, waiting. The clock ticked past midnight, and just as I was about to give up and go to sleep, it rang. My heart jumped in my chest as I saw the familiar unknown number flash on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling slightly. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just the familiar silence. Then I heard it, the breathing, slow, steady, unnervingly close. It sent shivers down my spine, my body tensing as I strained to hear anything else. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you calling me?" The breathing continued, unchanging, as if my questions had no effect. I was about to hang up when I heard something else. A faint whisper, too quiet to make out. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my heart pounding. "What did you say?" I whispered, fear and frustration mixing in my voice. There was a pause. Then the whisper came again, louder this time, clear enough for me to understand. It was my name, Nick. The voice was low, almost a hiss, and it sounded so familiar, but I couldn't place it. My blood ran cold. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The call ended abruptly, the screen going dark as the phone landed on the bed. I sat there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. How did they know my name? I felt exposed, vulnerable, like someone had reached into my life and pulled out something deeply personal. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. I kept the lamp on, its dim light doing little to chase away the fear taking root in my mind. I tried to tell myself it was just a cruel prank, that someone was messing with me, but deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. The next day, I went to the police. I told them about the calls, the strange noises, the voice that whispered my name. The officer I spoke to was polite, but dismissive. He suggested it was probably a prank or a glitch, and that I should block the number and change my phone number if it continued. But I couldn't shake the feeling this was something more than a simple prank. I blocked the number, as the officer suggested, but part of me dreaded the silence that might follow. As unsettling as the calls were, the idea of not knowing who was behind them or why they were calling was somehow worse. That night my phone didn't ring. I sat in bed staring at the screen, half expecting it to light up with that unknown number, but it remained dark. I should have felt relieved, but instead I was on edge, as if waiting for something to happen. Just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, my phone buzzed with a text message. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The message was from an unknown number, but not the same one as before. The message was short, just 2 words. Missed me. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen. The message felt like a taunt, a reminder that whoever was behind the calls wasn't finished with me yet. I quickly blocked the number, but it did little to ease my fear. I spent the next few nights on high alert, jumping at every little sound, unable to relax. The calls had stopped, but the unease lingered, a constant presence in the back of my mind. A week passed with no further contact. I started to think maybe it was over, that whoever had been tormenting me had moved on. But the sense of dread never fully left. I kept my phone close, waiting for the next call or message, knowing it could come at any time. And then, just as I was beginning to let my guard down, my phone rang again. I looked at the screen, my stomach twisting in knots. The number was unknown, but different from the previous ones. With a deep breath, I answered the call. There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought it was just another dead line. Then I heard it. My name, whispered in that same familiar voice. Mop. I hung up immediately, my heart racing. Whoever it was, they weren't done with me yet. I knew then that this wasn't just a random prank. Someone was watching me. Someone who knew my name, my habits, my life, and they weren't going to stop. The calls continued, each one more terrifying than the last. I stopped answering, but they kept coming, relentless and unnerving. The whispers became more frequent, the breathing more labored, as if whoever was on the other end was getting closer and closer. I changed my number, but it didn't help. The calls still found me. No matter what I did, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being hunted, that someone was out there, watching and waiting. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I know one thing for sure. They're not going to stop, not until they get what they're after, and that's the most terrifying part of all. Story 8. It started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had just gotten home from work, soaked from the downpour, when I noticed a package sitting on my doorstep. There was no return address, no tracking information, just my name scrawled in a hurried, almost illegible script. Puzzled, I brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. The cardboard was damp from the rain. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to open it. Inside, nestled among crumpled newspaper, was a doll. It was unlike any doll I had ever seen before. Its eyes were wide and unblinking, with a fixed, eerie smile that sent a shiver down my spine. The clothes it wore were old-fashioned, a frilly dress that seemed out of place in time. The entire thing gave off an unsettling vibe, but what caught my attention most was the note that accompanied it. "I've been waiting for you. Those 5 words, written in the same hurried script as my name on the box, made my stomach churn. The message was simple, but deeply unnerving. I hadn't ordered any doll, and I had no idea who would send such a thing to me, let alone with such a cryptic note. The whole situation felt wrong. I tried to shake off the unease and convince myself it was some kind of prank, but the doll's glassy eyes seemed to follow me as I moved around the apartment. Unable to bear its presence any longer, I decided to get rid of the doll. I wrapped it back in the box it had arrived in and carried it down to the dumpster behind my building. The rain had stopped, but the heavy clouds still hung low, making the alleyway feel dark and foreboding. I returned to my apartment relieved to finally be rid of it. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, something caught my eye. Sitting on my dresser was the doll. My heart skipped a beat. I was certain I had thrown it away. Panic surged through me as I approached it cautiously, half expecting it to move. Its expression hadn't changed, but it felt different now, more menacing, almost alive. I grabbed it again, this time driving it to a dumpster several blocks away. I had to be sure it was gone for good. The next day, I felt slightly more at ease, convincing myself it had all been some strange coincidence. But when I returned home from work, my blood ran cold. The doll was back, sitting in the middle of my living room. I couldn't understand how it kept returning. I lived alone. No one else had a key. Was someone breaking in? Playing a sick joke? My thoughts spiraled as fear and paranoia took hold. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow felt like a threat. The doll sat in the corner of the room, its unblinking eyes fixed on me. The following morning, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Keep the doll or face the consequences." My hands trembled as I opened it. The message inside was worse. "You've been chosen. Keep the doll and you'll be safe. Get rid of it again and you'll regret it." The email was untraceable. No sender, no IP address, nothing. I felt trapped. Whoever was behind this knew where I lived, how to contact me, and possibly even my daily routine. The thought of someone watching me, knowing my every move, sent me into full-blown panic. More emails followed over the next few days, each one more threatening than the last. "You can't escape. The doll belongs to you now. Don't defy it." The relentless messages eroded my sense of safety and sanity. I tried blocking the addresses, but the emails kept coming from different, untraceable sources. Desperate, I went to the authorities. I showed them the doll, the emails, explained everything. They listened, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They filed a report, but without evidence or a suspect, there was little they could do. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, but it did nothing to ease my paranoia. I began noticing strange things around my apartment. Objects slightly out of place. Doors I was sure I'd locked left ajar. And the doll. Always the doll. Never where I had last left it. It appeared in different rooms, as if it moved on its own. Sleep became a distant memory. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound, every unexpected movement. Its presence was oppressive, its eyes following me no matter where I went. The emails eventually stopped, but their message was clear. The doll was mine, and there was nothing I could do about it. One night, after another sleepless attempt at rest, I awoke to the sound of soft whispering. The room was dark, but the whispers were unmistakable, growing louder and more insistent. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and there was the doll, sitting on my bedside table, closer than it had ever been before. The whispers stopped the moment I looked at it. In the heavy silence that followed, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. Whether it was a curse, a prank, or my own mind unraveling, I had to get rid of the doll for good. The next morning, I packed a bag and left my apartment, driving out of town to a remote area. I brought the doll with me, making sure it was securely wrapped and hidden in the trunk. I found an old abandoned quarry, far from any roads or homes, and buried the doll deep within the earth, covering it with heavy rocks and debris. I hoped that by leaving it in such an isolated place, I could finally break free of whatever hold it had over me. When I returned home, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. The doll was gone, but the memories clung to me. For weeks, a constant weight I couldn't shake. I lived with the unshakable sensation of being watched, convinced that at any moment the doll might reappear. Over time, the feeling began to fade, slowly loosening its grip. I eventually moved to a new apartment, hoping to put the entire ordeal behind me. Yet every so often, I still find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those cold, unblinking eyes staring back at me. Story 9 began with something as ordinary as the lock on my apartment door. For months, it worked perfectly, a simple turn of the key sealing my home securely. Then, almost imperceptibly, it started to malfunction. I'd come home to find the door ajar, even though I was certain I had locked it before leaving. At first, I chalked it up to a fluke, a slight misalignment, or a minor defect. But as the days passed, the problem grew worse. The door would inexplicably unlock itself, and each time I walked in, an uneasy feeling washed over me. Determined to put an end to the issue, I bought a new, high-quality deadbolt from a reputable store. Installing it was straightforward, and when the lock clicked smoothly into place, I felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. Surely, my home was safe again. But the relief didn't last. Within days, the same strange problem returned. Despite my best efforts to secure it, I would come home to find the door standing open. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence or paranoia, but the nagging sense that something was very wrong only deepened. One night, I was jolted awake by a sound, a low, repetitive creaking, like a door moving slowly on its hinges. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to listen. The noise was faint, but unmistakable. Cautiously, I rose and made my way toward the living room. When I reached the hallway, my breath caught in my throat. The front door stood wide open, the darkness of the corridor outside stark against the dim glow of my apartment. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I rushed to slam it shut, my hands trembling as I locked it securely. Then I turned and took in the scene behind me. The living room was a disaster. Cushions tossed from the couch, books scattered across the floor, drawers yanked open with their contents strewn about, as if someone had been searching for something. My pulse raced as I scanned the apartment for any sign of an intruder. Nothing seemed to be missing, but the chaos was enough to leave me rattled. I spent the rest of the night on edge, flinching at every creak of the building, every gust of a wind against the windows. Morning couldn't come soon enough. I decided to reach out to my neighbors, hoping someone had noticed something unusual. I went door to door, explaining what had been happening, and asking if anyone had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. Most of them looked at me with concern, but shook their heads, saying they hadn't noticed anything strange. Only one neighbor, an elderly woman who lived 2 floors above, mentioned hearing odd noises during the night, but she had dismissed them, assuming it was just the building settling. With no real answers, my sense of unease grew. Despite all my efforts to secure it, the door continued to unlock itself. I began to question my own sanity. Was I overlooking something obvious? Missing some crucial detail? I examined the lock mechanism over and over, checked the door frame, and even called in a locksmith to inspect everything. Each time, they assured me the lock was fine, yet the problem persisted. As the weeks went on, the situation became more disturbing. The feeling of being watched was almost tangible. I started avoiding long absences from my apartment and would often return early, hoping to catch whatever was happening. But each time, I would find the door slightly ajar and my belongings subtly disturbed. It was always worse at night, which only fed my anxiety. Then came one especially unnerving night. I woke to the sound of someone moving inside my apartment. Soft, hesitant footsteps echoing from the living room. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in bed, straining to hear. Summoning every ounce of courage, I got up to check, but when I emerged, the apartment was eerily silent. The door was shut. Everything appeared normal, as if nothing had happened at all. I began to feel a creeping paranoia. Was someone actually trying to break in? Or was my mind unraveling under stress? I installed additional security measures, cameras, a motion sensor, even a temporary bar to reinforce the door. But despite all of it, the problem remained. The door still unlocked itself. My belongings were still disturbed. And yet, nothing was ever stolen. Eventually, the constant anxiety became unbearable. I moved out, leaving the apartment and its sinister mystery behind. My new place, with its solid locks and quiet hallways, felt like a sanctuary. Slowly, a sense of safety returned, but the memory of those nights refused to fade. That door, once just a simple barrier, had become a symbol of something far more sinister. Even now, its echo lingers in my mind, a haunting reminder of the fear that had taken root in my old apartment. Story 10 began with the smallest things. At first, I barely noticed. Who would? It's easy to misplace your keys or the TV remote. Everyone has those moments. Putting something down, getting distracted, then spending half an hour retracing your steps, trying to remember where you left it. But then it kept happening. One evening, I came home from work, tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter, and slipped into my usual routine, changing out of my work clothes, checking the mail, settling in to watch TV. When I reached for the remote, it wasn't on the coffee table, where I always left it. I checked the couch cushions, the floor, even the kitchen counter where I'd just been. It was gone. Frustrated, I tore through the living room, searching every corner, growing more agitated by the minute. I could have sworn the remote had been sitting right there in its usual spot, but after nearly an hour of looking, I gave up. The next morning, there it was, neatly placed on the coffee table, exactly where I'd been sure it wasn't the night before. A sense of unease settled in my chest, but I pushed it aside. I told myself I'd probably overlooked it, too tired to notice in the dim light. But that explanation didn't sit right with me. Then it happened again, and again. My keys, the remote, a pair of reading glasses, a book. One by one they vanished only to reappear later in the most obvious places, right where I had already searched. It was maddening. Each time it happened, I felt a little more like I was losing my grip on reality. I began questioning my own memory, wondering if I was really as forgetful as it seemed. But the part that gnawed at me the most was the growing sense that this wasn't simple forgetfulness. It felt deliberate, as though something, was moving my belongings on purpose, toying with me. The thought made my skin crawl. But what else could it be? I lived alone. There was no one else. Still, the feeling grew stronger with every incident. Then one day, I reached into a kitchen drawer for a pen, and instead found something else. A folded piece of paper tucked neatly beneath the silverware tray. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled it out, dreading what I might see. The note was handwritten, the script neat and almost elegant. "You'll never find what you're looking for." I stared at the words, my mind reeling. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. This wasn't some harmless prank. This was real. Someone had been inside my home. Someone had written this note and left it for me to find. The implications hit me all at once. I wasn't just misplacing things. Someone had been moving them, watching me search, and then leaving a message to taunt me. I stood frozen in the kitchen, clutching the note, my eyes darting around the room. I kept glancing over my shoulder, as if expecting to catch someone hiding in the shadows. But there was no one. The house was still and silent as always. Yet the silence felt different now. It was heavy, oppressive, like the walls themselves were inching closer, suffocating me. I spent the rest of the day scouring every corner, checking windows, doors, even the vents, searching for any sign of an intruder. Nothing. Everything was locked and secure, just as I had left it. And still, the note in my hand was undeniable proof that someone had been there. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the house that night. The thought of staying there alone, knowing someone might be watching me, was unbearable. I packed a bag and checked into a hotel, convincing myself I just needed time to think, to figure out my next move. For the next few days, I avoided going home as much as possible. I called the police. They came and inspected the house, but found no forced entry, no evidence of anyone else having been inside. They suggested I might have misplaced the note myself, or that it could have been left by a previous tenant. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd lived there for years. That note hadn't been there before. When the police left, I was alone again, alone with the gnawing sensation of being watched. I became hyper-aware of every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside. I jumped at shadows, flinched at my own reflection, and barely slept. Despite my fear, I had to return home eventually. I couldn't live in a hotel forever. But the moment I walked through the front door, a wave of dread hit me. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt foreign, as if it belonged to someone or something else. I tried to resume my normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. The sensation of being watched clung to me. Items continued to vanish and reappear, always in places I was certain I hadn't left them. It was driving me to the edge of madness. Then one evening, after yet another fruitless search for my missing keys, I found another note. It was in the same drawer, folded neatly like the first. My hands trembled as I opened it, my heart hammering in my chest. "Stop looking." I dropped the note as if it had burned me, my pulse racing. The message was unmistakable. Whoever or whatever was doing this didn't want me to figure it out. I didn't know what would happen if I did, but I was certain I didn't want to find out. That night, I packed my bags and left the house for good, unable to endure its suffocating atmosphere any longer. As I drove away, I glanced into the rearview mirror and thought I saw a shadow move in one of the upstairs windows. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I don't know what was in that house, and I don't want to know. I've moved far away, started over, and done everything I can to forget what happened. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the darkness presses in, I still feel eyes on me. I can't help but wonder if whatever was in that house followed me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Story 11. The crisp morning air felt electric against my skin as I set out on my usual jog, the rhythmic pounding of my feet against the pavement grounding me in routine. It was one of those mornings that promised a perfect day. The neighborhood slowly waking up around me. Gardeners tending to their flowers. Dog walkers pulling sleepy pets along. I let myself relax into the simplicity of the moment. That's when I first noticed him. He was standing at the edge of the park, a man in a hooded jacket. At first, I dismissed him as another passerby, but something about him felt off. He wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything, just standing perfectly still, his hood pulled low over his face, so that I couldn't make out his features. It felt like his gaze was fixed on me, though I couldn't be sure. When I glanced back, he was still there, motionless, as if carved from stone. The next day he appeared again, this time at the corner of my usual route. Same hooded jacket, same posture, same eerie stillness. Against the soft glow of the morning light, his presence felt more pronounced, his silhouette stark and unignorable. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them. My pace quickened. I told myself it was a coincidence, my imagination playing tricks on me, but the pattern was clear. Every day he appeared, in a different spot along my route, always on the edges of my vision, always watching. A creeping paranoia began to take hold. Was he following me, or was I losing my mind? The fact that he never spoke, never moved closer, only deepened the unease. He was like a living shadow, always present but never interacting. The more I tried to ignore him, the more impossible it became. One morning, desperate to break the cycle, I changed my route completely. I ran miles out of my usual path, through unfamiliar streets and neighborhoods, hoping to leave the shadow of the hooded man behind. But then I saw him, standing on the sidewalk ahead of me. Same hood, same posture. My heart lurched into my throat. Panic surged through me. How had he found me here? Had he followed me? Or was it some terrifying coincidence? I fumbled for my phone and dialed the police, my fingers trembling as I tried to keep my pace steady. I described him as best as I could. A man in a hooded jacket, standing still, watching. The dispatcher's calm voice assured me they'd send someone to check the area. I finished my run, my mind spiraling with fear. When the police arrived, they questioned me, took down the details, and began searching. But they found nothing. No man, no trace of him at all. It was as though he had vanished with the morning mist. Relieved yet unsettled, I decided to change my jogging route entirely, hoping to outrun the shadow that had begun to haunt my mornings. I found a new path, winding through a quieter park, surrounded by dense trees and rarely visited by others. For a while, the change felt like a reprieve. The hooded man didn't appear, and I began to relax, convincing myself that perhaps I had escaped him. But the unease never truly left. That constant gnawing awareness, the feeling of unseen eyes tracking me, remained embedded in my routine. Every rustle of the leaves, every distant figure flickering at the edge of my vision made me flinch. My mind replayed the encounters on a loop, each memory sharpening into something darker and heavier. Days turned into weeks, and though I rarely saw him again, his shadow lingered. It was as if he had carved himself into my psyche, his absence just as haunting as his presence. I became hyper-aware of everything around me, scanning the edges of my vision for any sign of him. The vigilance was exhausting, draining me, creeping into the rest of my life. I avoided quiet places, kept my head on a swivel, and always half expected that hooded figure to reappear. One evening, hoping to clear my head, I decided to take a walk along my new route. The air was cool, the path familiar enough to lull me into a fragile sense of safety. But as I rounded a corner, I froze. Familiar silhouette stood in the distance, a hooded jacket. My heart dropped into my stomach, my pace quickened, my breath turned shallow and ragged. I couldn't tell if it was the same man or someone else entirely, but the sight alone sent me spiraling back into panic. I went home shaking, debating whether to report it again. Part of me felt it was pointless. The police had already tried and failed to find him, yet the fear rooted so deeply inside me refused to be ignored. I called them once more, hoping, pleading, that this time they would take my concerns seriously. They arrived, but as before, the man was gone. They reassured me they'd keep an eye out, but offered no answers, no solutions, just platitudes. As I watched them drive away, a heavy frustration settled in my chest. The hooded man had become more than just an unsettling figure. He was a symbol of my vulnerability, a living reminder of how powerless I felt in the face of my own fear. I continued my new jogging route, trying to reclaim my mornings and my sense of safety, but the feeling of being followed remained, an unwelcome companion. No matter how hard I tried, the shadow of that man lingered in the back of my mind. Every step I took was a reminder of the silent watcher who had once haunted my runs, and of the mark he had left on my life. Story 12. I woke to an unsettling sight. My front door stood slightly ajar, the pale morning light spilling through the gap and casting long, distorted shadows across the hallway floor. The sight jolted me fully awake, a spike of dread racing through my chest. I stumbled out of bed, my mind scrambling to make sense of the scene. The first thing I did was check the door itself. The lock was intact. The deadbolt was engaged. Yet somehow, impossibly, the door had been left open, just enough for someone to slip through. I scanned the hallway for any sign of forced entry, my eyes darting to every corner. That's when I saw them. Muddy footprints leading from the doorway into my living room. I followed the trail, my pulse hammering louder with each step. The prints grew larger, more chaotic, as if whoever had left them had been pacing. They led me straight into the living room, where they scattered into a confusing pattern, circling aimlessly before fading. The furniture was undisturbed. Nothing was missing. Yet the air felt wrong, taut, heavy, charged with something unseen. I checked every room, opening closets, peering under beds, even checking the bathroom. Nothing. No sign of an intruder. It was as though whoever had entered had simply vanished into thin air. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, ready to call the police, when the screen lit up. A voicemail notification. My heart stopped when I saw the number. The message was from my own phone. For a moment, I simply stared at it, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, with trembling fingers, I pressed play. Static crackled through the speaker, faint and broken, before dissolving into a sound that made my blood run cold. My own breathing, rhythmic, slow, and unmistakably mine. The faint rustle of sheets, a soft, muffled snore. It was a recording of me sleeping. The realization hit like a physical blow. Someone had been in my home. Someone had stood close enough to record me as I slept. My stomach churned as the full implications settled in. How had they done this? How had they even gotten my number? My hands shook violently as I tried calling my voicemail again, desperate for some explanation. But deep down, I already knew. I wasn't alone that night, but the message had vanished. Panic clawed at my chest as I fumbled for my phone, calling the police to report the break-in. My voice shook as I tried to convey the depth of my fear and confusion. An officer arrived soon after, taking my statement and dusting the door for fingerprints. They found nothing. No clues. No leads. Nothing to explain how someone had slipped into my home and left behind such a chilling message. The officer advised me to upgrade my home security, to keep watch for anything suspicious. It was meant to be reassuring, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. That day I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the windows felt magnified and threatening. My once comforting home had transformed into a cage of paranoia. I took the officer's advice anyway, installed extra locks, set up a security camera, hoping these measures might restore some sense of safety. But the following night was restless. I found myself checking the locks over and over, flinching at the smallest sound. I reviewed the camera footage obsessively, scanning for movement, for shadows, for something. Nothing. No figures, no intrusions, no flicker of movement across the screen. It was as if the person who had invaded my space had simply melted into thin air. Days turned to weeks, and the intrusion began to feel like a distant nightmare. Yet the fear never left me completely. I lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, double-checking locks, scanning corners, feeling eyes on me even when no one was there. Then, one evening, as I sorted through a stack of old papers, my blood ran cold. Buried deep in the pile was a small folded note. My hands trembled as I opened it, already dreading what it might say. The message was short, scrawled in the same neat, unsettling handwriting as before. I know where you live. I'm always watching. The sight of it sent me spiraling into a fresh wave of panic. This wasn't over. Someone had been watching me far longer than I'd realized. I called the police again as soon as I read the note, my hands trembling, my voice a brittle whisper. But there was nothing new they could do. The message was too vague, too insubstantial to trace. No leads, no suspects, just me, alone with my fear. My paranoia soared to new heights. I became obsessed with my security system, checking it every few hours, as though the act alone could keep me safe. I added motion detectors, more cameras, even reinforced the windows. My home slowly transformed into a fortress of surveillance, yet I never felt any safer. I began to suspect everyone, my neighbors, the delivery drivers, even the contractors who came to work on the building. Anyone could be watching me. Anyone could be involved. One night, I sat in the living room, with the lights dimmed, trying to lose myself in a book. The silence of the house pressed in on me like a weight. As I turned a page, a sound drifted from the hallway, a faint rustling, like something being dragged across the floor. I froze, the book slipping from my hands. The sound stopped abruptly. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I held my breath and rose slowly, moving toward the hallway. The darkness seemed thicker there, almost alive, and the quiet was deafening. I flicked on the hallway light. Nothing. No signs of disturbance. No new footprints. No additional notes. My flashlight beam swept across the walls, darting from corner to corner, but there was no one there. Exhausted, heart pounding, I returned to the living room. My hands shook as I picked up my book again, trying to steady myself. The memory of that voicemail, the sound of my own breathing, recorded by an unseen presence, echoed in my mind. It had carved a permanent scar into my sense of safety. I began to wonder if I would ever feel secure again, if my home would ever be the sanctuary it once was. The locks, the cameras, the alarms, they were only bandages over a wound that ran much deeper. In the end, the true identity of my intruder remained a mystery. My house might have been fortified, but the knowledge that someone had been inside had stood over me as I slept, lingered like a shadow I could never shake. The trust I once had in my own walls was gone, shattered forever. Story 13. It began so subtly, I almost didn't notice. A faint whisper at first, just a breath of sound, barely perceptible, in the stillness of my apartment at night. When the city fell silent, and even the hum of distant traffic faded, I would hear it. A voice calling my name from somewhere beyond the walls. I would lie in bed, my pulse quickening, straining to catch the words, but they always slipped away, just out of reach, like a dream dissolving in the morning light. Sometimes I sat up, heart hammering, pressing my ear against the cool plaster in the dark, desperate for clarity. The sound was so soft, so elusive, that I began to wonder if it was my imagination. I told myself it was only the wind, or the building shifting in its sleep. But deep down, I knew better. I started asking my neighbors if they'd heard anything unusual. I'd knock on their doors at odd hours, embarrassed but desperate. They'd only stare at me with puzzled expressions, insisting they'd heard nothing at all. Their calmness unnerved me. The walls seemed thick enough to block out all but the loudest of noises. So why could I hear it? The voice grew more insistent as the nights passed. What began as a faint murmur became a pleading call, repetitive, urgent. Each night it intensified, echoing through my apartment as though someone or something was trying to break through. I tried to trace the sound, moving from room to room, pressing my hands against walls and floors, but there was nothing. The walls were solid. The building was sound. Yet the voice persisted, like an unseen force reaching for me. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat in the living room, unable to think about anything else. The call gnawed at me, hollowing me out. My paranoia deepened. I paced the apartment, checking windows, doors, even the air vents, desperate to find the source. But every inspection the same way. Nothing. Weeks went by. The voice grew louder, more desperate. It was as if something was clawing at the walls, trying to reach me.